Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is James Anderson, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the Hocking Hills region of southeastern Ohio 3 weeks ago, though it feels like a lifetime has passed since then. I should start by explaining why we were there in the first place. Sarah Rodriguez, Michelle Young, and I had been planning this camping trip for months, a chance to reconnect after the messy end of Sarah's relationship with her ex-fiancé and my own struggles with unemployment. Michelle, always the mediator in our trio, suggested we needed to get back to basics and spend a weekend in nature. She'd found this remote campsite near Old Man's Cave, far enough from the tourist trails that we'd have genuine solitude. What I didn't tell them was that I needed this trip more than they knew. The dreams had been getting worse. Nightmares of being trapped in small spaces, of something following me through endless corridors of trees. My therapist said it was anxiety manifesting, but there was something primal about these dreams that felt like warning. We arrived at the trailhead on Friday afternoon, October 13th. I remember the date because Michelle made a joke about it being unlucky. The parking area was empty except for a rusted pickup truck that looked like it hadn't moved in years. Sarah checked her GPS one more time before we shouldered our packs. "Signal cuts out about a mile up the trail," she said, stuffing her phone into her jacket pocket. "But I downloaded the offline maps." The trail wound through dense Ohio woodland, towering oaks and maples painted in violent reds and golds, their leaves carpeting the ground in a thick, muffling layer. The air carried that sharp autumn scent of decay and earth. As we hiked deeper, the tourist markers disappeared, replaced by occasional blazes carved into tree bark, some so old they'd nearly healed over. Michelle led the way, her auburn hair catching the late sunlight filtering through the canopy. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd grown up hiking these hills with her grandfather. Sarah and I followed, and I tried to ignore the way my chest tightened whenever the trees pressed too close to the narrow trail. "Remember when we used to do this every weekend in college?" Sarah asked, breaking the comfortable silence. She was walking beside me now, her dark eyes scanning the forest with the alertness that had made her such a good journalism student. "Before life got complicated," I replied, though even then our dynamic had been strained. Sarah and I had dated briefly senior year, a few awkward months that ended when we realized we worked better as friends. But there was still something unresolved between us, a tension that Michelle pretended not to notice. We found our campsite just as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. It was a small clearing beside a stream, surrounded by ancient hemlocks that blocked out most of the remaining light. "The perfect spot," Michelle declared, far enough from any marked trails that we'd have complete privacy. As we set up camp, I noticed things that should have been warnings. The clearing was too perfect, too geometrically round, as if it had been deliberately carved from the forest. No birds sang in the trees around us. The stream ran silent, its water dark as coffee despite the clear October sky. "Anyone else think it's weird how quiet it is?" I asked as we arranged our tents in a triangle around the fire pit. "It's called peace and quiet, city boy," Michelle laughed, but I caught her glancing toward the tree line. "Maybe the animals are just shy." Sarah was kneeling beside the stream, cupping water in her hands. "Water's ice cold," she said, "and it tastes metallic, like pennies." We built our fire as darkness fell, but the wood was strangely resistant to lighting. Even with lighter fluid, the flames struggled to catch, and when they finally did, they burned with an odd blue tint around the edges. Michelle blamed it on the type of wood, but I'd been camping since I was a kid, and I'd never seen fire behave like that. That first night, we tried to recapture the easy camaraderie of our college years. We shared stories, drank the wine Sarah had smuggled in, and roasted marshmallows over our reluctant fire. But there was an undercurrent of unease that none of us acknowledged directly. Around midnight, Sarah retreated to her tent, claiming exhaustion. Michelle and I sat by the dying fire, listening to the oppressive silence of the woods. "James," she said quietly. "Did you hear that?" I strained my ears but heard nothing. "What?" "It sounded like someone crying. A child, maybe?" We sat motionless for several minutes, but the sound didn't repeat. Eventually, Michelle shrugged and went to her tent, leaving me alone by the embers. I should have banked the fire and gone to sleep, but something kept me sitting there, staring into the darkness beyond our small circle of light. That's when I first saw them, pale shapes moving between the trees, just at the edge of my vision. Every time I turned to look directly, they were gone, but in my peripheral vision, they danced and swayed like wraiths. My rational mind said it was just fog, or my eyes playing tricks in the uncertain light, but some deeper instinct screamed danger. I finally forced myself into my tent around 2 a.m., but sleep came fitfully. I dreamed of being buried alive, of earth filling my mouth and nose, of clawing at wooden boards that splintered under my fingernails. I woke gasping just before dawn, my sleeping bag soaked with sweat despite the October chill. Saturday morning brought new strangeness. Michelle emerged from her tent complaining that her backpack had been moved during the night. She'd left it by the fire pit but found it on the opposite side of the clearing, carefully placed beside a fallen log. Nothing was missing, but her energy bars had spoiled overnight, turning green and fuzzy despite being sealed in their packages. "Animals, maybe?" Sarah suggested, but we all knew no animal would move a pack so deliberately or reseal it so carefully. We decided to explore the area, following what looked like a game trail deeper into the forest. The woods seemed different in daylight, older somehow, with trees that grew in impossible spirals and moss that hung like funeral shrouds. Our conversation gradually died as we walked, each of us lost in our own unease. Sarah tried to check our location on her phone, but the GPS showed us somewhere in the middle of Lake Erie. The offline maps she'd downloaded were corrupted, displaying nothing but white static. "Technology," Michelle said with forced lightness. "Who needs it?" But I could see the worry in her eyes. We'd been hiking for hours and nothing looked familiar. The sun was wrong, too. We should have been walking east, but the light came from all directions at once, filtering through the canopy in a way that made navigation impossible. That's when we found the bones. They were arranged in a perfect circle around an ancient oak, its trunk scarred with symbols that looked like they'd been carved with claws rather than tools. The bones were old, yellowed with age, but they'd been arranged recently. No moss or leaves covered them, despite the thick layer of debris everywhere else in the forest. "We should go back," Sarah whispered, but none of us could agree on which direction that was. Every path looked identical, winding away into green-tinged gloom. Michelle knelt beside the bone circle, studying the carvings on the tree. "These look like warnings, maybe? Or instructions." "Don't touch anything," I said, but she was already tracing one of the symbols with her finger. The moment she made contact, the temperature dropped 20 degrees, and somewhere in the distance, something howled. Not quite wolf, not quite human. We ran then, crashing through underbrush without any plan except escape. Branches tore at our clothes and faces, and more than once I thought I saw shapes keeping pace with us, moving through the trees with fluid grace. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, finally collapsing in a small ravine where a creek bubbled over smooth stones. "Where are we?" Sarah gasped, looking around wildly. Nothing was familiar. Not the rock formations, not the type of trees, not even the sound of the water. It was as if we'd run into a completely different ecosystem. Michelle pulled out her compass, but the needle spun lazily without settling on any direction. "It's broken," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We spent the rest of Saturday trying to find our campsite, following creek beds and game trails that seemed to double back on themselves. The sun never moved from its position directly overhead, creating a perpetual noon that felt wrong in every possible way. Our voices began to sound strange in the muffled air, and I found myself checking over my shoulder constantly, certain we were being followed. When we finally stumbled back into our clearing, more by luck than navigation, the sun was setting, though it felt like we'd been walking for only an hour. Our camp was exactly as we'd left it, except for one detail that made my blood run cold. 3 sleeping bags had been unzipped from the inside and lay open like empty cocoons. "We zipped them up this morning," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I remember checking them. That night we took turns keeping watch. During my shift from midnight to 2 a.m., I heard the crying again, definitely a child's voice, calling for help somewhere in the darkness beyond our fire. Every instinct screamed at me to investigate, to help whoever was lost out there. But a deeper wisdom, the kind that had kept our ancestors alive in the wild, kept me frozen in place beside the dying embers. When Michelle's shift started, I retreated to my tent but couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling our camp. They stopped directly outside my tent and I held my breath, waiting. "James." It was Michelle's voice, but something was wrong with it. Too flat, too emotionless. "James, you need to see this." I unzipped my tent flap and looked out. Michelle stood by the fire pit, but she was wrong. Her posture was too rigid, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. In the dying firelight, her eyes reflected like an animal's. "Michelle," I whispered. She turned toward me, and I saw that her smile was too wide, stretching nearly to her ears. "Come see what I found, James. It's beautiful." Behind her, Sarah's tent was empty, the entrance flap moving gently in a wind I couldn't feel. My friend stood there, not Michelle wearing Michelle's face, and gestured toward the tree line with movements that were just slightly off, like a marionette operated by someone who'd only heard dancing described. I zipped my tent shut and lay there shaking until dawn, listening to not Michelle walking circles around our camp, occasionally calling my name in that horrible, empty voice. When morning came, I emerged to find Michelle sitting by the dead fire, looking perfectly normal except for the dark circles under her eyes. "Rough night?" she asked, and her voice was completely her own again. "Where's Sarah?" Michelle frowned, glancing around the camp as if noticing Sarah's absence for the first time. "She said she was going to gather firewood. That was—" She paused, confusion clouding her features. "I don't remember when that was." Sarah's tent was still empty, her sleeping bag cold to the touch. We called her name until our voices were hoarse, searching in widening circles around the campsite. We found her backpack about a quarter-mile downstream, sitting neatly on a flat rock as if someone had placed it there. Her wallet, phone, and water bottle were still inside, but her spare clothes were missing. "She wouldn't just leave," Michelle insisted, but I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. We spent most of Sunday searching, following every trail and creek bed within miles of our camp. The forest felt different during our search, malevolent, actively working against us. Paths that should have led back to familiar landmarks instead curved away into deeper wilderness. The trees seemed to shift when we weren't looking directly at them, creating new barriers and dead ends. As the sun began to set, we found Sarah. She was sitting on a fallen log about 50 yards from our campsite, facing away from us. She sat perfectly still, her dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders. Relief flooded through me as we approached. "Sarah, thank God we've been looking everywhere for you," I called out. She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge our presence. As we got closer, I could see she was wearing different clothes. A white dress that seemed to glow in the twilight instead of the hiking gear she'd worn when she disappeared. "Sarah!" Michelle reached out to touch her shoulder. Sarah turned around. Her face was Sarah's face, but wrong in ways that made my vision blur and my stomach heave. Her skin was too pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were completely black. Not just the irises, but everything, like staring into empty sockets. When she smiled, Her teeth were needle-sharp and filed to points. "I've been waiting for you," she said in Sarah's voice, but with an accent I couldn't place, something ancient and foreign. "I found the most wonderful place. You have to come see." She stood with movements that were too fluid, too graceful, like she was floating rather than walking. The white dress moved without any wind, rippling like it was underwater. "Sarah, what happened to you? Where have you been?" Michelle stepped forward, but I grabbed her arm, every nerve screaming danger. "Not." Sarah tilted her head, studying us with those empty black eyes. "I met the families who live here. They're so hungry, and they've been waiting so long. They want to meet you too." She pointed toward the tree line, and I could see them now. Pale figures moving between the trees, too tall and too thin, with limbs that bent in wrong directions. They wore the remnants of clothing from different eras, as if they'd been collecting lost travelers for decades. "We should go," I whispered to Michelle, but she was staring at not Sarah with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Sarah, you're scaring us," Michelle said. "Let's go back to camp and talk about this." Not Sarah laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "This is so much better than camp. Here, we don't need food or water or sleep. Here, we can be together forever." She reached out with one hand, and I saw that her fingernails had grown into long, yellowed claws. Behind her, the pale figures began to move closer, their movements synchronized like a predatory pack. I grabbed Michelle's hand and ran. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes and faces. Behind us, not Sarah called out in her horrible, cheerful voice, "Don't run! The families just want to meet you. We can all be together." The sound of pursuit followed us. Not just footsteps, but the rustle of many bodies moving through the forest, accompanied by whispers and chittering sounds that made my skin crawl. Every time I glanced back, I caught glimpses of pale figures keeping pace with us, their two long limbs allowing them to move through the trees like spiders. We reached our campsite and frantically grabbed our essential gear: water, flashlights, the first aid kit. Our hands shook so badly we could barely function, and every second felt like an eternity as we waited for those things to emerge from the tree line. "The car," Michelle gasped. "We need to get to the car." But which direction was the parking area? In our panic, neither of us could remember which trail we'd taken to reach this clearing. Every path looked identical in the fading light, winding away into darkness that seemed deeper than it should be. We chose randomly and ran, following what we hoped was the trail back to civilization. The sounds of pursuit faded behind us, but somehow that was worse. Silence meant they could be anywhere, moving through the trees just beyond our sight. Our flashlight beams seemed weaker than they should be, swallowed by the pressing darkness. The trail beneath our feet felt wrong, too soft, like we were running on something organic rather than packed earth. More than once I thought I felt it shift beneath my feet, as if the path itself was alive. "James," Michelle whispered, grabbing my arm. "Look." Ahead of us on the trail stood Sarah, the real Sarah this time, wearing her hiking clothes and looking perfectly normal except for the confusion on her face. "Where have you guys been?" she asked. "I've been looking for you for hours. I went to get water, and when I came back, the camp was empty." Michelle started forward, relief evident on her face, but I held her back. Something was wrong. Sarah's clothes were clean, undamaged despite supposedly wandering the forest for hours. Her hair was perfectly neat, not a single twig or leaf in it. And her eyes were the wrong color. Sarah's eyes were dark brown, but these were blue. "You're not Sarah," I said quietly. "Not." Sarah's face twisted into an expression of hurt that would have been convincing if not for those wrong-colored eyes. "James, what are you talking about? It's me. We need to get back to camp. There's something wrong with these woods." "Sarah has brown eyes," I said, backing away and pulling Michelle with me. For just a moment, the thing wearing Sarah's face flickered, and I saw what was underneath, something pale and stretched, with too many joints and teeth like broken glass. Then the illusion snapped back into place. "You're being paranoid," not Sarah said, but her voice had that same flat quality I'd heard from Not Michelle the night before. "Come with me. I know the way back." We turned and ran in the opposite direction, leaving Not Sarah standing alone on the trail. Behind us, we heard her call out in a voice that was no longer human. "You can't leave. The families won't let you. You belong to the woods now." The sound that followed was like nothing I'd ever heard, a chorus of inhuman voices raised in harmony, echoing through the trees from every direction. We were surrounded. We stumbled through the darkness, crashing into trees and tripping over roots, guided only by our failing flashlights and pure terror. The voices followed us, sometimes near, sometimes distant, calling our names in the voices of our friends and family members. "James, help me," my mother's voice crying out from somewhere to our left. "Michelle, over here." Her grandfather's voice, the one she'd told us about 100 times. But we kept running, because we both knew our loved ones were hundreds of miles away, safe in their beds, not lost in these cursed woods. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning in this place. Our flashlights died one by one, leaving us stumbling through absolute darkness. The voices grew more insistent, more desperate, promising safety and warmth if we would just stop running. Then, impossibly, we saw light ahead, not the cold glow of our flashlights, but warm yellow light spilling from windows. We emerged from the tree line to find ourselves in a small clearing where an old cabin sat, smoke rising from its chimney. "Thank God," Michelle gasped, but I was more cautious. In these woods, nothing was what it seemed. We approached slowly, ready to run at the first sign of wrongness. Through the windows we could see a cozy interior, wooden furniture, bookshelves, a fire crackling in the fireplace. It looked like salvation. An elderly man opened the door before we could knock. He was tall and thin, with kind eyes and a white beard, wearing clothes that looked handmade but well cared for. "Lost, are you?" he asked in a voice that was warm and completely human. Come in. These woods can be treacherous at night." Every instinct screamed at me not to trust this apparent sanctuary, but we were exhausted, terrified, and completely lost. Michelle was already moving toward the door, drawn by the promise of warmth and safety. "I'm Samuel," the old man said as we stepped inside. "I've been living in these woods for longer than I care to remember. You wouldn't be the first travelers to lose their way." The interior of the cabin was exactly as it had appeared from outside, rustic but comfortable, with no hint of the wrongness that permeated the rest of the forest. Samuel offered us coffee and blankets, asking no questions about how we'd come to be stumbling through the woods in the middle of the night. "The woods have been active lately," he said as we warmed ourselves by the fire. "Old things stirring. Best to wait for daylight before you try to find your way out." "Have you seen our friend?" Michelle asked. "Dark hair, about my height. She went missing yesterday." Samuel's expression grew troubled. "I've seen someone matching that description, yes. But I don't think it was your friend." He told us about the families, ancient things that had lived in these woods since before the first settlers arrived. They fed on the lost and lonely, taking their shapes and memories to lure others into their domain. "They can't cross running water," Samuel explained, "and they can't enter a home unless invited. But they're patient. They'll wait out there until morning, wearing the faces of everyone you've ever loved." As if summoned by his words, we heard voices outside, Michelle's parents, my college roommate, Sarah herself, all calling our names and begging us to come out. The voices circled the cabin like wolves, growing more desperate and angry as the night wore on. "Don't listen," Samuel warned, "and whatever you do, don't look outside. Sometimes seeing them breaks the protection." We spent the longest night of our lives huddled by the fire, listening to the voices of our loved ones pleading and threatening by turns. Sometimes the voices would change, becoming the screams of the damned, or strange languages that hurt to hear. The cabin shook with their fury, but the walls held. When dawn finally came, the voices faded, and Samuel led us to a trail we hadn't seen in the darkness. "Follow this for 2 miles," he said. "It'll take you to the main road." Your car should be there. They usually leave the vehicles untouched." "What about our friend, the real Sarah?" I asked. Samuel's face was grave. "If they took her 2 days ago, she's gone. I'm sorry, the families don't usually keep their prey alive for long." We found our car exactly where Samuel had said it would be, in a parking area beside a road I didn't recognize. The rusted pickup truck was gone, but that seemed like the least strange thing that had happened. The drive home passed in a blur of interstate highways and gas station coffee. Neither Michelle nor I spoke much about what we'd experienced. What was there to say? Who would believe us? We reported Sarah missing, of course. The authorities searched the Hocking Hills for weeks, but they never found any trace of her. Not her body, not her gear, nothing. The case eventually went cold, filed away with all the other unexplained disappearances that happen in wilderness areas every year. But I know what happened to her. She's still out there, wearing her face, waiting for the next group of lost travelers to stumble into those woods. Sometimes, late at night, I get text messages from her number, just her name and the location of some remote campsite, as if she's inviting me back. I've moved to the city now, as far from forests as I can get. But even here, surrounded by concrete and steel, I sometimes see them in my peripheral vision. Pale figures standing just outside the range of streetlights, watching, waiting. Michelle sees them too, though we don't talk about it. The dreams are the worst part. Every night I'm back in those woods, running through the darkness while voices call my name. Sometimes I find Sarah sitting by our campfire, her black eyes reflecting the flames as she smiles with her needled teeth. Sometimes I find the cabin, but when Samuel opens the door, he has Sarah's face. And sometimes, in the worst dreams, I never left the woods at all. I'm still there, running in circles through the endless darkness, while Michelle and Sarah walk beside me, their eyes black as night, trying to convince me to stop, to rest, to meet the families who live between the trees. Those are the dreams I hope are just dreams. But this morning, I woke to find dirt under my fingernails and leaves in my hair, though I live on the 15th floor of a downtown apartment building. And my phone shows 17 missed calls from Michelle's number, all placed at 3 a.m. while I was supposedly asleep. I haven't called her back. I'm not sure I want to know what voice would answer. Some nights, when the city feels too small and the walls press too close, I think about driving back to those woods. Not to camp. God, never to camp, but just to see if I can find the trail that leads to Samuel's cabin, to ask him how long the protection lasts and what happens when it finally fails, because I'm starting to suspect that leaving the woods was just another illusion, another trick played by the families. Maybe we never left at all. Maybe this whole life, the apartment, the job I found after we got back, the therapy sessions where I don't tell the truth, maybe it's all just another kind of forest, and I'm still running in circles, waiting for the voices to find me again. The worst part is the growing certainty that when they do, I'll be ready to listen. My name is Robert Johnson, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the Hocking Hills State Park in southeastern Ohio during what was supposed to be a romantic weekend getaway with my girlfriend Sarah. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what really happened out there, even if no one believes me. Sarah Rodriguez and I had been together for 2 years. She was the kind of person who collected vintage postcards and knew the names of every wildflower we passed on our hikes. At 26, she had this infectious enthusiasm for the outdoors that had gradually worn down my city-bred resistance to sleeping in tents and using pit toilets. This trip was meant to be special. I'd been carrying an engagement ring in my backpack for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. The Hocking Hills region had always felt different to me, even before everything went wrong. There's something ancient about those sandstone cliffs and hollows, something that makes you feel like you're being watched by eyes that have been there since before the first Native Americans walked those trails. The park sits on what used to be Cherokee and Shawnee hunting grounds, and local folklore is thick with stories of things that don't quite fit into the modern world. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in late October. The fall colors were at their peak, brilliant reds and golds that should have been beautiful but somehow felt too intense, like a fever dream. Our campsite was tucked back in a grove of ancient oaks, isolated from the main camping area. Sarah had specifically requested somewhere quiet, away from families with screaming kids and college students with portable speakers. "Look at this place, Rob," she said, spinning around with her arms outstretched as I set up our tent. "It's like we've stepped back in time." She was right, but not in the way she meant. There was something timeless about the hollow we'd chosen, but it wasn't the peaceful, eternal quality she was seeing. It felt stagnant, like time moved differently here. The shadows seemed to linger too long after the sun moved, and the silence had a weight to it that pressed against my eardrums. Our first night passed without incident, though I slept poorly. Every small sound, a twig snapping, the rustle of leaves, seemed amplified in the darkness. Sarah slept deeply beside me, her breathing steady and undisturbed. I envied her easy rest. Saturday morning brought our first real sign that something was off. Sarah had packed her grandfather's old compass, a brass antique he'd carried in Korea. She'd been using it to navigate since she was 12, and I'd never seen it fail her. But when we tried to get our bearings before heading out on the trail, the needle spun lazily in circles, never settling on any particular direction. "That's weird," Sarah murmured, tapping the glass face. "It worked fine last weekend." I pulled out my phone to check our GPS location, but the signal bars flickered between 1 and none. The map app kept loading and crashing, showing us in different locations each time it refreshed. Sometimes we were in the park, sometimes we were hundreds of miles away in Pennsylvania or West Virginia. "Technology," Sarah said with a laugh, but I caught the slight edge in her voice. "Good thing I brought paper maps." The paper maps, however, seemed wrong too. Not obviously incorrect, the major landmarks were all there, the trail markers matched what we could see, but there were subtle differences. Extra trails marked in places where we could see no evidence of paths. Distances that didn't match what we remembered from the park website. Contour lines that suggested geological features we couldn't identify. We decided to stick to the main trail, a well-marked loop that would take us past the famous Old Man's Cave and through some of the park's most spectacular rock formations. The path was wide and clear at first, busy with other hikers enjoying the beautiful autumn weather. But as we moved deeper into the forest, the crowds thinned, and eventually, we found ourselves alone. The first cave system we encountered wasn't on any map. It was a narrow opening in a sandstone cliff face, hidden behind a curtain of yellowing ferns. Cool air flowed from the darkness within, carrying scents of earth and something else, something sweet and organic that made my stomach turn. "We should check it out," Sarah said, already pulling a flashlight from her pack. "I've always been claustrophobic. Even thinking about confined spaces makes my chest tight and my palms sweaty." The idea of squeezing into that dark opening made every nerve in my body scream in protest. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "It's not marked on the trail map. Could be dangerous." "Come on, Rob, where's your sense of adventure?" She was already moving toward the opening, drawn by that irrepressible curiosity that made me love her and sometimes drove me crazy. Besides, I can see light coming from deeper in. It probably connects to another entrance. She was right. There was a faint glow emanating from somewhere within the cave system. Natural light, but wrong somehow. Too blue, too steady. I wanted to grab her hand and pull her away, but she was already ducking into the entrance. "Sarah, wait." My voice echoed strangely in the cave mouth, coming back distorted and multiplied. I counted at least 4 distinct echoes, which didn't make sense given the size of the opening. Reluctantly, fighting every instinct, I followed her inside. The passage was tighter than it had looked from outside. The walls pressed close on both sides, and the ceiling dropped low enough that I had to duck. My breathing became shallow and quick, and sweat started beading on my forehead despite the cave's coolness. The beam of Sarah's flashlight danced ahead of me, illuminating rough stone walls marked with strange scratches that looked almost like writing. "Rob, you have to see this." her voice called from somewhere ahead. The passage opened into a larger chamber, high enough that our flashlight beams couldn't reach the ceiling. The blue light I'd noticed was stronger here, emanating from cracks in the rock walls. It pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat. The air moved differently in this space, circulating in patterns that suggested the cave system was much larger than we'd realized. Sarah stood in the center of the chamber, turning slowly with her light raised. "It's incredible," she breathed. "Look at these formations." What I saw made my skin crawl. The rock formations weren't the typical stalactites and stalagmites you'd expect in a limestone cave. These were organic-looking, curved and twisted like frozen flesh. Some were pale and smooth, others rough and dark. In the pulsing blue light, they looked almost alive. "We need to leave," I said, surprised by how shaky my voice sounded. "Just a few more minutes," Sarah replied, but she sounded distant, distracted. She was examining the wall, running her fingers over those strange scratches. "These marks, they're not random. There's a pattern." I moved closer, fighting the overwhelming urge to run back toward the entrance. The scratches did seem to follow some kind of logic, groups of parallel lines separated by more complex symbols. But looking at them too long made my eyes water and my head ache. "Sarah, please, this place is giving me the creeps." She turned to look at me, and for just a moment in the shifting blue light, her face looked wrong. Her features were the same, but there was something different about her expression, something cold and alien in her eyes. Then she smiled, her familiar, warm smile, and the moment passed. Okay, you're right, let's head back." But when we turned toward where we'd entered, there was no passage. The chamber was circular, with openings leading off in 4 different directions. None of them looked like the tunnel we'd used to enter. "Which way did we come from?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Sarah played her flashlight beam over each opening in turn. I'm not sure. They all look the same." We stood there for several long minutes, listening to the sound of our own breathing and the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. The blue light continued its slow pulse, and I became increasingly aware of how deep underground we must be. The weight of all that rock above us felt crushing, like it might collapse at any moment and bury us alive. "Let's try this one," Sarah said finally, pointing to the passage that felt most familiar to me. We walked for what seemed like hours through a maze of interconnected tunnels. Sometimes the passages were wide enough for us to walk side by side, sometimes so narrow we had to move single file. The walls were marked with more of those strange scratches, and occasionally we'd pass chambers filled with the twisted rock formations. Our phones had no signal, of course, and their clocks seemed to be malfunctioning. Mine showed times that jumped forward and backward randomly, sometimes indicating we'd been underground for 12 hours, sometimes showing we'd traveled backward in time. Sarah's phone was worse. The screen flickered between different dates, occasionally showing years in the future or deep in the past. "I think we're lost," I finally admitted. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face me. In the beam of my flashlight, her face looked pale and strained. "No, we're not lost. We just need to stay calm and think logically." But her voice had changed. It was still Sarah's voice, but there was something underneath it now, something that made my spine tingle with unease. She sounded older somehow, more knowing. We continued walking, taking turns at random, hoping to stumble across an exit. The passages all looked identical now, and I began to suspect we were walking in circles. Several times I thought I recognized formations we'd passed before, but when I pointed them out to Sarah, she insisted they were different. It was during one of these discussions that I realized something was wrong with time itself. According to my watch, when it was working, we'd been underground for over 6 hours. But I didn't feel hungry or thirsty, and my phone's battery, which had been at 30% when we entered, was still at 30%. Sarah looked exactly as fresh as when we'd started, not a single hair out of place despite hours of crawling through narrow passages. "Sarah," I said carefully, Do you feel like we've been down here for 6 hours? She considered the question seriously. Time moves differently in places like this, she said, and again I heard that strange undertone in her voice. The earth has its own rhythms. That wasn't something Sarah would normally say. She was practical, scientific. She would have made jokes about my paranoia or suggested rational explanations for the time distortion. This philosophical response felt foreign, like words coming from someone else's mouth. We found what appeared to be an exit just as my resolve was beginning to crumble entirely. A narrow passage sloped upward, and I could see actual sunlight filtering down from above. Warm, yellow sunlight that looked nothing like the cold blue glow that had surrounded us in the caves. I practically ran toward that light, my claustrophobia overriding all other concerns. Behind me, Sarah's footsteps echoed strangely, sometimes matching my pace, sometimes seeming to come from completely different directions. When I emerged from the cave into the blessed openness of the forest, I fell to my knees and gulped the fresh air like a drowning man. Sarah emerged a few moments later, moving with fluid grace. "That was amazing," she said, stretching like a cat in the sunlight. "I feel so refreshed." I stared at her. Amazing wasn't the word I would have chosen. Terrifying, claustrophobic, disorienting, those were better descriptions. And she did look refreshed, I realized. More than refreshed. She looked somehow more vibrant than she had that morning, her skin glowing with health, her eyes brighter. "How do you feel?" she asked, moving closer to me. "Like I've been buried alive for 6 hours," I said honestly. She laughed, but it didn't sound quite right. The pitch was correct, but the rhythm was off, like someone doing an imperfect imitation of Sarah's laugh. We were in a part of the forest I didn't recognize. The trees were different here. Older, more gnarled, with bark that looked almost black in the afternoon light. The forest floor was carpeted with leaves that rustled with every step, but the sound they made was wrong. Too dry, too sharp, like walking on broken glass. "Which way to camp?" I asked. Sarah consulted her compass, which now spun even more wildly than before. "This way," she said with confidence, pointing deeper into the strange forest. I wanted to argue, to suggest we backtrack and try to find the main trail, but exhaustion was setting in. My phone still showed impossible times, and the battery was now draining rapidly, dropping from 30% to 20 to 15 as I watched. We walked for another hour through increasingly unfamiliar terrain. The trees grew closer together, their branches interlacing overhead until they blocked out most of the sky. What little light filtered through had that same blue quality as the illumination in the caves. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" I asked. "Trust me," Sarah said without turning around. That was when I noticed her backpack. It was the same blue pack she'd been wearing all day, but the wear patterns were different. The familiar scuffs and stains were gone, replaced by different marks in different places. And there was a smell coming from it, sweet and organic, like the scent I'd noticed in the first cave. "Sarah, stop for a minute." She turned, and I saw her face clearly for the first time since we'd left the caves. It was Sarah's face, absolutely Sarah's face, but something fundamental had changed. Her expressions were too precise, too controlled. Her smile was exactly the right width, held for exactly the right amount of time. It was like watching someone perform the role of Sarah Rodriguez rather than actually being her. "What's wrong?" she asked, and even her concern sounded rehearsed. "You're different. Since we came out of the cave, you're different." "I'm fine, Rob. I'm perfect." She reached out and touched my cheek with her fingertips. Her skin was cool, cooler than it should have been after hours of hiking. Better than I've ever been. I stepped back, my heart beginning to race. "Sarah, what happened to you in there?" "Nothing happened to me." Her smile never wavered. "I just learned some things. About myself, about what I could become." The blue light was getting stronger as the sun set, emanating from the trees themselves now. In that eerie illumination, Sarah's shadow looked wrong. It moved independently of her body, reaching toward me with fingers that were too long, too sharp. "We need to get back to camp," I said, backing away slowly. "We are going back to camp," she said, but she was moving toward me now, matching my retreat step for step. "Don't you trust me, Rob? Don't you love me?" I wanted to say yes, wanted to pretend everything was normal, but every instinct I had was screaming that this wasn't Sarah. This was something else. Something that had learned to wear her shape but didn't understand how to be human. "I love Sarah," I said carefully, "but you're not Sarah." Her perfect smile finally faltered. For just a moment her features shifted, becoming something older and hungrier. Her eyes reflected the blue light like an animal's, and when she opened her mouth, I saw that her teeth were too sharp, too numerous. Then the moment passed, and she was Sarah again. "Rob, you're being paranoid. The caves spooked you, that's all. Let's just get back to camp and have some dinner, and you'll feel better." But I was already running. The forest seemed to twist around me as I fled, paths appearing and disappearing, familiar landmarks shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. Behind me, I could hear Sarah, or the thing wearing Sarah's form, calling my name. Her voice echoed from multiple directions, as if there were several of her moving through the trees. "Rob, don't leave me. I love you." Each repetition sounded less human, more like a recording being played at the wrong speed. The words were right, but the emotional content was missing, like a computer trying to simulate human speech. I crashed through underbrush and stumbled over fallen logs, my panic overriding any attempt at navigation. The blue light grew stronger, pulsing faster now, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. The trees seemed to lean inward, their branches reaching for me like gnarled fingers. Then, impossibly, I saw our tent. It sat in the exact same clearing where we'd pitched it the night before, but everything else was wrong. The trees surrounding it were different species, and they were arranged in a perfect circle like they'd been planted rather than grown wild. The fire ring we'd built was there, but it was carved from a single piece of black stone rather than the loose rocks we'd gathered. The tent itself looked newer, too clean, too perfect. It glowed faintly in the blue light, and I realized with growing horror that the light was coming from inside it. "Rob," Sarah's voice called from within. "Is that you? I was getting worried." I stood at the edge of the clearing, every muscle in my body trembling. The logical part of my mind insisted this was impossible. We'd been lost in the forest, miles from our campsite. But there was our tent, and there was Sarah's voice, sounding perfectly normal now. "Come inside," she called. "I've got dinner started." I approached slowly, listening for any hint of that wrongness I'd detected before. But Sarah sounded like herself again. Tired, maybe a little annoyed at my disappearance, but fundamentally human. I unzipped the tent flap and looked inside. Sarah was sitting cross-legged on her sleeping bag, our camp stove burning beside her with a pot of something that smelled like beef stew. She looked up at me with a warm smile, and for a moment I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. "There you are," she said. "Where did you go? I came back and you were gone." "Came back from where?" She frowned. "The cave, of course. We got separated, and when I found my way out, you weren't there." I stared at her. "Sarah, we came out of the cave together. We walked through the forest together. You were different." "Different how?" She looked genuinely confused, but I noticed she wasn't meeting my eyes directly. "You don't remember. The way you were acting. The things you said." "Rob, I think you might have hit your head or something. We explored the cave, we got lost for a while, then we found separate exits. I've been here cooking dinner for the past hour, waiting for you to show up." Her explanation was reasonable, logical. It was exactly the kind of thing that could happen to inexperienced cavers, but I remembered the weight of her hand on my cheek, the coolness of her skin, the terrible wrongness of her shadow. "Show me your compass," I said. "What?" "Your grandfather's compass. Show it to me." She reached into her pack and pulled out the brass instrument. It looked exactly the same as always, but when she opened it, The needle pointed steadily north. No spinning, no confusion. Just a normal compass working normally. "It's working fine," she said. "Must have been some kind of magnetic interference in the cave." I sat down heavily on my own sleeping bag, doubt creeping in. Maybe I had hit my head. Maybe the stress of being underground had triggered some kind of panic reaction. The human mind was capable of extraordinary self-deception when pushed to its limits. Sarah moved closer, her hand finding mine. Her skin was warm now, normally warm. "Hey," she said softly. "It's okay. Cave exploration can be intense, especially for someone with claustrophobia. Your mind was just trying to protect you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to dismiss everything as stress-induced hallucination and enjoy our weekend together. I even started to relax, letting her familiar presence wash over me. That's when I noticed what was cooking in the pot. "Sarah," I said slowly, "what's for dinner?" "Beef stew," she replied without hesitation. "Your favorite." But we hadn't brought any beef. Our food supplies were carefully planned and packed: trail mix, granola bars, instant noodles, and some dried fruit. Nothing that required actual cooking beyond boiling water. And the smell coming from the pot was wrong too. It was rich and meaty, but underneath there was something else. Something that reminded me of the sweet, organic scent from the cave. "Where did you get beef?" I asked. Sarah's hand tightened on mine. I found it, in the forest. Fresh meat." "You found fresh meat? In the forest?" "There was an animal, already dead. I thought it would be a shame to waste it." Every alarm in my head was going off again. Sarah was a vegetarian. She hadn't eaten meat in 5 years, and the sight of dead animals usually made her queasy. She would never, under any circumstances, cook random meat she'd found in the woods. I looked into the pot. The stew was dark red, almost black, and it moved with a consistency that was all wrong for beef. Chunks of something floated in the liquid, pale and irregularly shaped. "Sarah, you don't eat meat." "I do now," she said, and her voice had changed again. That cold, alien undertone was back. "I've developed new appetites." I jerked my hand away from hers and scrambled toward the tent entrance. She moved faster than humanly possible, blocking my path before I could reach the zipper. "Don't leave again, Rob," she said, and now her voice was layered, harmonizing with itself like multiple people speaking in unison. "Stay and have dinner. You'll like how it tastes." In the blue light filtering through the tent fabric, I could see her shadow on the wall behind her. It was huge, reaching across the entire surface, with too many arms and a head that was the wrong shape entirely. "You're not Sarah," I whispered. "I'm more Sarah than Sarah ever was," the thing replied. "I know everything she knew, feel everything she felt. I love you exactly as much as she did. More, even. I can love you forever, Rob. I can love you in ways she never could." She reached for me, and her fingernails had grown long and sharp. Where they touched the fabric of the tent, they left small, precise tears. "What did you do with her?" "She's here," the creature said, tapping its chest. "She's part of me now. Her memories, her feelings, her love for you. All preserved, all perfect. She's happier this way." I dove for the tent entrance, managing to get the zipper halfway down before she grabbed my ankle. Her grip was impossibly strong, and those sharp nails dug into my flesh through my jeans. I kicked frantically with my free leg, connecting with something that felt wrong. Too soft in some places, too hard in others. She released me with a sound that might have been laughter or might have been something else entirely. I tumbled out of the tent and ran into the forest, crashing through the darkness without any thought for direction or destination. The blue light followed me, emanating from the trees, the ground, the very air around me. It pulsed faster now, like an excited heartbeat, and I realized it was responding to my fear. The more terrified I became, the brighter it grew. Behind me, Sarah's voice called out, "Rob, you're hurting my feelings. Come back and let me love you." But it wasn't just one voice anymore. It was dozens of voices, all speaking in perfect harmony, all using Sarah's intonation but with subtle differences that made my skin crawl. Some were pitched higher, some lower. Some had accents she'd never had. Some sounded older or younger than her 26 years. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook, stumbling through a forest that seemed to shift and change around me. Paths appeared and disappeared, streams flowed uphill, and the stars visible through the canopy moved in patterns that defied astronomy. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to stop. I collapsed against the trunk of an enormous oak tree, gasping for breath and listening for sounds of pursuit. The forest was silent except for my own ragged breathing. I waited there for what felt like hours, but my watch had stopped entirely, its hands frozen at 3:33. The blue light gradually faded, returning the forest to natural darkness. Normal sounds returned. The rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the distant hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind through leaves. When dawn finally came, it was glorious. Real sunlight, warm and golden, driving away the shadows and making the forest look normal again. Birds sang in the trees, and I could smell pine needles and damp earth instead of that sickly sweet cave scent. I oriented myself by the sun and started walking east, hoping to find a trail or road that would lead me back to civilization. After several hours of hiking, I stumbled onto a paved trail marked with official Park Service signs. Other hikers were out enjoying the morning, normal people with normal concerns about weather and trail conditions. A park ranger found me around noon, sitting by the side of the trail in a state of near-complete exhaustion. I must have looked terrible because he immediately called for medical assistance and started asking if I was injured or lost. "My girlfriend," I managed to tell him. "She's missing. We were camping and she disappeared." He radioed for additional search teams while I tried to explain what had happened. I stuck to the basic facts. We'd gone exploring, gotten separated in a cave system, and when I couldn't find her, I tried to hike out for help. I didn't mention the wrongness, the thing wearing her face, the impossible forest that changed around me. The search lasted 3 days. They found our campsite exactly where we'd left it, but there was no sign of Sarah. Her backpack was in the tent, along with most of her personal belongings, but she was simply gone. The beef stew I remembered was nowhere to be found, just our original food supplies, untouched. They searched every known cave in the area and brought in specialized rescue teams with ground-penetrating radar. They found nothing. No trace of Sarah Rodriguez anywhere in Hocking Hills State Park. The official conclusion was that she'd fallen into an unmapped cave system and her body had been swept away by underground streams. It was a reasonable explanation, the kind of tragic accident that claimed hikers every year. The case was closed after a month. But I know what really happened. I know that Sarah went into those caves and something else came out wearing her shape. I know that whatever took her is still down there, in the blue-lit chambers beneath the earth, learning to be human by studying the memories it absorbed. Sometimes, late at night, I get phone calls where no one speaks. But I can hear breathing on the other end, and sometimes, very faintly, I can hear Sarah's voice whispering my name. The caller ID always shows her number, even though her phone was destroyed months ago. I've moved 3 times since then, always to places far from any caves or forests. I live in the city now, surrounded by concrete and steel and electric lights. I tell myself I'm safe here, that the thing in the caves can't reach me in the modern world. But sometimes I see her in crowds, just for a moment, just at the edge of my vision. A flash of dark hair, a familiar jacket, the particular way she used to walk. When I turn to look directly, there's never anyone there, but I can smell that sweet, organic scent from the caves. I found the engagement ring in my pocket 3 weeks after Sarah disappeared. I don't remember putting it there, and I'm certain I'd left it hidden in my backpack back at the campsite. It was cleaned and polished to a brilliant shine, as if someone had been taking very good care of it. There was a note with it, written in Sarah's handwriting. "I'm waiting for you, Rob. When you're ready to love me forever, just come back to the caves. I'll be there." I threw the ring away, but it reappeared on my nightstand the next morning. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know the truth. If anything happens to me, if I disappear, or if I'm found dead under mysterious circumstances, remember this story. Remember that there are things in the deep places of the earth that are hungry for human experience, human emotion, human love. And remember that sometimes when we go exploring in the darkness, we bring something back with us. Something that learns to wear our faces and speak our words but can never quite understand what it means to be human. I still have the ring. It sits on my kitchen table, gleaming in the fluorescent light, waiting for me to make a choice. Every day it seems a little more appealing, and every day I remember a little less clearly why I ran from the woman I love. Maybe she's right. Maybe this is just fear talking. Just my mind unable to accept that Sarah has changed, grown, become something more than she was. Maybe love means accepting someone even when they become something you don't understand. The caves are calling to me. In my dreams, I walk those blue-lit passages toward a reunion with the woman who knows me better than I know myself. In my dreams, her love is perfect and eternal and hungry. I think I'm going to drive back to Hocking Hills tomorrow, just to see, just to remember what really happened down there in the dark. After all, what's the worst that could happen? Found among the personal effects of Robert Johnson, who disappeared while hiking in Hocking Hills State Park in November 2024. His car was discovered in the main parking area, but no trace of Johnson has ever been found. Park officials note that this marks the third unexplained disappearance in the area in the past 18 months. My name is James Anderson, and I am 32 years old. This happened in October of last year, deep in the Hocking Hills of southeastern Ohio, where the ancient sandstone cliffs carve shadows that never fully retreat, even in daylight. Michael Williams and Kevin King had been my closest friends since college, and every autumn we'd escape the suffocating routine of our lives in Columbus for a weekend of camping. This trip was supposed to be different, a celebration of Kevin's recent promotion to senior architect and my divorce finally being finalized. We'd planned to hike the Buckeye Trail's most remote section, camp near the old Cherokee Rock formations, and drink away the years' accumulated failures under stars unpolluted by city light. I should have recognized the signs, should have turned back when my GPS started showing impossible routes through terrain that didn't exist on any map. Should have listened when the locals at the gas station in Logan went quiet the moment we mentioned Cherokee Rock, their eyes sliding away like water off glass. But I was desperate for normalcy, for the simple pleasure of friendship and firelight and forgetting. So I ignored the prickling at the back of my neck as we drove deeper into the forest on roads that grew narrower and more twisted with each mile. The first day passed without incident. We set up camp in a clearing surrounded by towering hemlocks, their branches so dense they formed a living cathedral that blocked out most of the October sky. Michael, ever the optimist, declared it perfect. Kevin seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone despite having no signal, running his fingers through his thinning brown hair in a nervous gesture I'd known for over a decade. "You okay, man?" I asked as we gathered deadfall for the fire. He looked up, startled, as if I'd woken him from a dream. "Yeah, just work stuff. Can't seem to turn it off, you know?" I didn't know. Kevin had always been the most grounded of us, the one who compartmentalized effortlessly. But everyone processes stress differently, and his recent promotion had come with crushing responsibility. I let it slide. That evening, as darkness fell with the sudden finality that October brings to the forest, we discovered our first problem. Despite having plenty of dry wood and Michael's expensive fire-starting kit, we couldn't get the campfire to light. The kindling would catch, flame dancing promisingly for a few seconds, then die as if something was actively smothering it. "Wood must be damper than it looks," Michael muttered, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. We'd built hundreds of fires together. This was different. Kevin wasn't even trying to help. He sat on a fallen log 20 feet away, staring into the tree line with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The darkness beyond our camp seemed to pulse with its own malevolent life, and I found myself unconsciously scooting closer to Michael as he worked. Finally, the fire caught. But something was wrong with the flames. They burned with an eerie blue-green tinge that cast sickly shadows and provided no real warmth. We sat around it anyway, unwilling to acknowledge that anything was amiss, and tried to maintain the illusion of a normal camping trip. "Remember sophomore year when we got lost in the Smoky Mountains?" Michael said, forcing levity into his voice. "We were convinced we were going to die out there." I nodded, but the memory felt distant, like someone else's life. "Different kind of lost," I murmured. Kevin hadn't spoken in over an hour. When I looked at him across the strange fire, his eyes reflected the light like an animal's. We slept poorly that night. The forest was too quiet. No owl calls, no rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, not even the whisper of wind through leaves. Just oppressive silence broken occasionally by sounds that had no source. A child crying somewhere in the distance, the scrape of fingernails against bark, breathing that seemed to come from directly behind our tents. I lay in my sleeping bag, every nerve on fire, listening to Michael's restless tossing in the tent beside mine. Kevin's tent was silent. Too silent. I strained to hear the sound of his breathing, but there was nothing. Around 3 a.m, I heard footsteps circling our camp. Slow, deliberate, with an odd shuffling quality that suggested the walker wasn't entirely comfortable on 2 legs. The steps would pause for long minutes, and I imagined something studying us, learning us, deciding. When morning finally came, gray and sunless, Kevin was gone. His tent was zipped shut from the outside, his sleeping bag laid out neat and undisturbed. All his gear remained, including his boots. Michael and I stared at the empty space where our friend should have been, our minds struggling to process the impossibility. "Maybe he went for a walk," Michael said, but his voice was thin with barely controlled panic. "You know, Kevin, he's an early riser." We searched for 3 hours, calling his name until our voices were raw. The forest swallowed our shouts without echo. Worse, the deeper we went into the woods, the more disoriented we became. My compass spun wildly, unable to find north. The GPS on my phone showed only static. The trails we'd marked on our map seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when we weren't looking directly at them. "We need to hike back to the car," I said. "Get help, call the park rangers." But when we tried to retrace our steps to camp, we found ourselves walking in circles. The landscape had subtly changed. Trees we'd marked as landmarks were gone, replaced by identical hemlocks that offered no guidance. Moss grew on all sides of the trunks, rendering the old woodsman's trick useless. It was Michael who spotted the blood first. Dark stains on the trunk of an enormous oak, roughly head height, as if someone had been pressed against the bark with tremendous force. The blood was still tacky, not quite fresh, but far from dry. "Kevin!" Michael screamed, his voice cracking. "Kevin, where are you?" The answer came from behind us. "Right here." We spun around to find Kevin standing at the edge of our vision, just where the shadows began. He was smiling, but it wasn't his smile. It stretched too wide, revealing too many teeth, and it never touched his eyes. Those eyes. Jesus, those eyes. They were the same brown color they'd always been, but now they held a depthless quality, like looking into a well at midnight. "Where have you been?" Michael rushed toward him, relief making him careless. "We've been looking everywhere. Are you hurt?" Kevin's head tilted at an angle that was almost natural, almost normal, but something about the gesture made my stomach clench. "Hurt? No. I'm much better now." His voice was wrong. The cadence was off, words coming a fraction of a second too late, as if he had to think about each syllable before speaking. And there was something else. A wet quality to his speech, as if his mouth was full of saliva. "We should get back to camp," I said carefully. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't leave Michael alone with whatever Kevin had become. "Yes," Kevin agreed, still wearing that terrible smile. Camp. We should definitely go back to camp. The walk back felt like a funeral march. Kevin led the way with an unsettling confidence, navigating the twisted terrain without hesitation while Michael and I struggled to keep up. He moved differently now. His gait was somehow too fluid, joints bending at angles that weren't quite right. Sometimes I could swear I saw extra joints where there shouldn't have been any. When we reached our campsite, I nearly vomited. Our tents had been shredded from the inside, long tears in the fabric that could only have been made by claws. Our food supplies were scattered and partially consumed, but not by any animal I could identify. Tooth marks in the canned goods suggested something with fangs like a wolf, but the intelligence to use tools. Animals, Michael said weakly. Probably bears. Kevin laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Not bears. Something much better than bears. That evening, we huddled around another impossible fire. This one burned almost black, its smoke rising in spirals that defied wind or physics. Kevin sat across from us, perfectly still except for his eyes, which tracked our every movement with predatory focus. "Tell us about your promotion," I said, desperate to maintain some pretense of normalcy. "The Henderson project is going well?" Kevin's smile widened further. Henderson. Yes. All those people in their little boxes. So trusting. So tender. Michael shot me a worried look. "Kevin, you're scaring us, man. Maybe you hit your head when you fell? We should get you to a hospital." "I didn't fall," Kevin said, and his voice had dropped to a whisper that somehow carried perfectly across the fire. "I was invited. And now I understand so much more. About hunger. About the hunt. About what you really taste like under all that fear." He licked his lips, and I saw that his tongue was black and far too long. I grabbed Michael's arm. "We need to go. Now." But when I looked around our campsite, I realized the truth with crushing clarity. We weren't in the same clearing anymore. The trees were wrong. Older, more twisted, their branches forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ground beneath us felt soft and spongy, like flesh. And the darkness beyond our fire stretched infinitely in all directions, a vast, hungry mouth waiting to swallow us whole. "You can't leave," Kevin said, and now his voice came from multiple directions at once. "This is where you belong, where you've always belonged. Can't you feel it? The way the forest watches you? The way it wants you?" Michael was hyperventilating beside me, his breath coming in short gasps that clouded white in the suddenly frigid air. "This isn't real. This can't be real." Kevin stood up with liquid grace, and I saw that his shadow cast by the firelight didn't match his movements. It writhed and twisted, sometimes taking shapes that weren't remotely human. "Reality is negotiable here. Time moves differently. Space bends, and I've learned to bend with it." He took a step toward us, and another, and I realized with horror that each step was covering impossible distances. The fire pit that had been between us was somehow behind him now, though I never saw him walk around it. "Run," I whispered to Michael. "Where?" he whimpered. It was a good question. The darkness beyond our camp moved with malevolent life, and I could hear things stirring in its depths. Wet sounds, sliding sounds, the snap of breaking bones. Kevin was close enough now that I could smell him, a reek of rotting meat and damp earth that made my eyes water. "I want to show you something beautiful," he said, "something I learned out there in the deep woods, about transformation, about becoming." His face began to change. The skin rippled like water, bone structure shifting beneath the surface. His jaw unhinged with a wet pop, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth that went back farther than any throat should allow. His fingers lengthened, nails becoming claws that could tear through steel. Michael screamed. I grabbed a burning branch from the fire and swung it at Kevin's transformed face. The flames connected with the sound like meat on a grill, and Kevin staggered back, his inhuman shriek echoing through the forest. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Michael to his feet. We plunged into the darkness between the trees, branches tearing at our clothes and skin as we crashed through underbrush that seemed designed to trap and hold us. Behind us, Kevin's laughter followed, no longer even attempting to sound human. The forest had become a maze. Paths opened before us only to dead end at cliff faces that hadn't been there moments before. Trees moved when we weren't looking directly at them, rearranging themselves to block our escape routes. The ground beneath our feet shifted constantly, sometimes solid earth, sometimes boggy marsh, once even what felt like tiles that clicked together like teeth. Michael stumbled and fell, his ankle twisting with an audible pop. When I helped him up, his face was gray with pain and terror. "I can't," he gasped. "I can't keep running." From somewhere in the darkness behind us came Kevin's voice, but multiplied now, as if dozens of mouths were speaking in unison. "Why are you running from me? I'm your friend. I just want to share what I've learned. I want to make you better." We found what looked like a cave entrance in the side of a sandstone cliff and crawled inside, praying it would provide some shelter. The space was larger than it had appeared from outside, stretching back into the rock farther than our phone's flashlight could penetrate. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, not Native American petroglyphs, but something older and more alien, patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when observed directly. Michael was shivering uncontrollably, whether from cold or shock I couldn't tell. "What happened to him?" he whispered. "What the fuck happened to Kevin?" I had no answer. How do you explain that your best friend has been replaced by something wearing his face? That the forest itself seems to be alive and malevolent? That we're trapped in a place where the normal rules of reality don't apply? Outside the cave, we heard footsteps approaching. But they weren't Kevin's anymore. These sounded like hooves or claws or something that walked on legs with too many joints. They circled the cave entrance slowly, methodically, and with each pass they grew closer. "James," Kevin's voice called, though it now carried harmonics that made my teeth ache. "Michael, you're only making this harder on yourselves. Come out, and I'll make it quick. Stay hidden, and I'll have to get creative." Michael whimpered and pressed himself deeper into the cave. I could feel his terror radiating from him like heat, and I realized with growing horror that our fear was attracting whatever Kevin had become. It fed on our panic, grew stronger with each terrified heartbeat. The footsteps stopped directly outside the cave entrance. "I can smell you in there," Kevin whispered, his voice now a sibilant hiss that echoed off the cave walls. "I can smell your sweat, your blood, your beautiful, delicious fear. Did you know fear has a flavor? It's sweet, like honey, but with an undertone of copper. I never knew that when I was limited, when I was human." A shadow fell across the cave mouth, but it was wrong. Too large, with appendages that moved independently of any recognizable form. Whatever Kevin had become was no longer remotely human-shaped. "You know," the thing that had been Kevin continued, its voice now coming from multiple directions simultaneously. "I've been thinking about our friendship. All those years of shared experiences, camping trips, beer nights, the time you helped me move into my first apartment, Michael, the way you covered for me when I was going through my divorce, James. Such beautiful memories." The shadow at the cave mouth grew larger, more complex. I could see appendages feeling along the rock face, testing for other ways in. But I understand now that those memories were just appetizers. The real meal is what comes next. The intimacy of consumption. The way you'll look at me, really look at me, in those final moments when you realize what I've become. What I'm going to do to you. Michael was sobbing quietly now, his whole body shaking. I wrapped an arm around him, as much for my own comfort as his. The cave felt like a tomb, and we were just waiting for the burial to begin. "I'm going to take my time," Kevin's voice continued, and now it seemed to come from inside the cave with us, from the very walls themselves. "I'm going to show you things about pain that humans were never meant to understand. I'm going to keep you alive for days, weeks maybe. Time works differently here. Did you know that? Minutes can stretch into hours, hours into years. I can make a single scream last for decades. Something wet and warm dripped onto my shoulder. When I looked up, I saw eyes staring down at us from the cave ceiling, dozens of them, all different sizes and colors, all unblinking. Some were human, some weren't. "Found you," Kevin whispered, his breath hot against my ear. I spun around, but he wasn't behind me. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, from inside my own head. Michael screamed, a sound of pure animalistic terror that seemed to go on forever. When I looked at him, his eyes had rolled back to show only whites, and blood was trickling from his nose and ears. "The human mind isn't designed to process what I've become," Kevin's voice explained with clinical detachment. "It's breaking down, trying to protect itself by shutting down. But I won't let it. I'm going to keep him conscious for everything." The cave walls began to pulse like a heartbeat, and I realized with crystalline horror that we weren't in a cave at all. We were inside something living, something that had been pretending to be stone and safety. The symbols on the walls weren't carved. They were veins, carrying some kind of phosphorescent fluid that made them glow with sickly light. "Welcome to my new home," Kevin said, and suddenly he was there in front of us, but not as we'd ever seen him before. He was massive now, easily 8 feet tall, his limbs elongated and jointed in impossible ways. His skin had taken on a bark-like texture, and things moved beneath it. Parasites, maybe, or organs that served functions I couldn't begin to imagine. His face was the worst part. It was still recognizably Kevin, but stretched and distorted like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. His mouth had been split wider, extending almost to his ears, and filled with rows of sharp teeth. His eyes had multiplied, some human-sized, others enormous and compound like an insect's. "Do you like what I've become?" he asked, tilting his head with genuine curiosity. "The forest offered me such gifts, such wonderful hungers to explore." Michael had stopped screaming and was now staring at Kevin with the glassy-eyed expression of someone whose mind had simply given up. Drool ran down his chin, and his body twitched occasionally as if receiving electrical shocks. "You've broken him," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Kevin laughed, the sound like wind through dead leaves. "Broken? No, no, no. I've liberated him, freed him from the prison of linear thought, of human perception. He's seeing reality as it truly is now, without all those comforting illusions." He reached toward Michael with one impossibly long arm, fingers ending in claws that gleamed like obsidian. "And now, it's your turn, James. Don't worry. It only hurts until you stop being human enough to understand pain." I closed my eyes and waited for the end. But it didn't come. When I opened them again, Kevin was staring past me with an expression of confusion and growing fear. "No," he whispered. "Not yet. I'm not finished with them yet." The cave, the thing we were inside, shuddered and began to contract. The walls pressed inward, and a sound like tearing fabric filled the air. "What's happening?" I asked. Kevin's multiple eyes darted around frantically. It's done with me. I was just a tool, a way to gather you here." His voice was rising in pitch, becoming more human as panic overtook him. "It doesn't need me anymore." The thing that had consumed us was regurgitating, forcing us out through what I now realized was a throat lined with bony ridges. We tumbled through darkness, Michael's limp body beside me, Kevin's transformed form already beginning to dissolve as whatever had changed him withdrew its gifts. We hit solid ground hard enough to drive the air from my lungs. When I could breathe again, I found myself lying on cold stone beneath a gray October sky. We were back in the real world, in what looked like a familiar part of Hocking Hills State Park. Michael was unconscious but breathing. His face had returned to normal, though his eyes still moved rapidly beneath closed lids as if he were experiencing an endless nightmare. Kevin lay nearby, human again, but changed in ways that went deeper than flesh. His hair had gone completely white, and when he opened his eyes, I saw in them a kind of knowledge that no human being should possess. "It let us go," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "We were entertainment, a snack. But it's still hungry, James. It's always hungry." He tried to sit up and failed, his body shaking uncontrollably. "The things I saw when it had me. The things it showed me. There are so many of them out there, in the deep woods, in the places humans don't go, and they're all hungry. I managed to get Michael over my shoulder and Kevin to his feet, and somehow we made it back to civilization. The park rangers found us 3 hours later, dehydrated and hypothermic but alive. They said we'd been missing for 5 days, though by my reckoning it had been less than 48 hours. Michael was hospitalized for 2 weeks. He has no memory of what happened after the first night, and I pray every day that it stays that way. He functions normally most of the time, but sometimes I catch him staring into shadows with an expression of absolute terror, and I know that somewhere deep in his mind, he's still in that place. Kevin quit his job and moved to the city, to the most urban environment he could find. He won't go anywhere near trees now, won't even keep houseplants. He calls me sometimes late at night and tells me about the dreams, about the things he learned when he wasn't human anymore. "It's still out there," he always says before hanging up. "And now it knows we exist. It knows our taste." As for me, I moved to Arizona. Desert country, where trees are sparse and the landscape is too harsh for old hungers to take root. But sometimes, on moonless nights, I hear that wet, sliding sound from my dreams, and I know that distance is just another illusion. The forest is patient. It has all the time in the world. And we're marked now, Kevin and Michael and I. We've been tasted, sampled, found wanting for now, but never forgotten. I still have the photos from that trip on my phone. In every single one, there's something wrong with the shadows. They stretch in impossible directions, form shapes that hurt to look at directly. And in the last photo, the one I don't remember taking, all 3 of us are smiling. But only 2 of us have our own shadows. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the deep woods of southeastern Ohio, in the forgotten corners of Wayne National Forest where the old mining roads peter out into deer trails and the cell towers can't reach you. I went there to disappear, not permanently, though after what happened I sometimes wish I had, but for long enough to stop hearing Marcus's voice echoing in my empty apartment, stop seeing his coffee mug in the sink, stop reaching for his side of the bed in those awful moments between sleep and waking. 3 months since he'd moved out, taking his books and his stupid ceramic owl collection and leaving behind only the smell of his cologne lingering in the bathroom like a ghost. The divorce papers had been finalized 2 weeks ago. I thought camping might help me find some peace, or at least exhaust me enough to sleep through the night without dreams. I should have known better. I should have stayed home. My dog, Cooper, a 3-year-old German Shepherd mix, sat in the passenger seat of my Honda CR-V as we wound deeper into the forest on State Route 26. His ears were perked forward, nose pressed to the window, tail thumping against the door. At least one of us was excited about this trip. "What do you think, Coop?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. "Think we can survive 3 days without Wi-Fi?" He turned to look at me with those intelligent brown eyes, then went back to watching the trees blur past. The late October afternoon was crisp and bright, the maples and oaks painted in brilliant reds and oranges. It was the kind of day that made you believe in fresh starts and new beginnings. I'd chosen a dispersed camping area deep in the national forest, miles from the established campgrounds. The ranger at the visitor center had given me a concerned look when I'd asked for directions to the most remote spot they allowed camping. "You sure you want to go way back there by yourself?" he'd asked, his weathered face creased with worry. "Gets pretty isolated. No cell service and it's been a wet fall. Roads can get dicey." "That's exactly what I'm looking for," I told him. Now, bouncing along a rutted Forest Service road that seemed to grow narrower with each passing mile, I was starting to second-guess that decision. The trees pressed closer on both sides, their branches scraping against the roof of my car with sounds like fingernails on chalkboard. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in broken shafts, creating a maze of light and shadow that played tricks on my eyes. My GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, but I had the hand-drawn map the ranger had given me. According to his directions, I needed to follow this road for another 2 miles, then look for a small clearing marked by an old stone foundation, the remains of a 19th-century homestead. Cooper began to whine softly, a sound I'd never heard from him before. His tail had stopped wagging and he was panting despite the cool air. "What's wrong, boy?" I reached over to pat his head, but he flinched away from my touch, eyes fixed on something ahead that I couldn't see. The road curved sharply to the left, and suddenly we were there. A small meadow dotted with the crumbling remains of fieldstone walls, surrounded on all sides by towering oaks and maples. The clearing was maybe 50 yards across, just big enough for a couple of tents. A stream burbled somewhere nearby, hidden by the undergrowth. I parked near the tree line and stepped out, stretching muscles cramped from the long drive. The silence was immediate and absolute. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no city hum. Just the whisper of wind through leaves and the distant murmur of water over stone. Cooper jumped out of the car and immediately began pacing in tight circles, nose to the ground, hackles raised. His behavior was setting my nerves on edge, but I chalked it up to unfamiliar territory and new smells. "Come on, Coop. Help me set up camp." I pulled my gear from the back of the car. A 4-season tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, cooler full of food, and enough water for 3 days. Cooper's gear filled a separate bag. His food, collapsible bowls, favorite tennis ball, and the thick sleeping pad he'd claimed as his own. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon as I hammered tent stakes into the soft earth near the old foundation. Cooper continued his anxious pacing, occasionally stopping to stare into the trees with such intensity that I found myself following his gaze, searching for whatever had captured his attention. I saw nothing but shadows growing longer. By the time I had the tent set up and my camp organized, dusk was settling over the forest like a gray blanket. I lit my portable camp stove and heated up a can of chili, sharing bites with Cooper, who seemed to relax slightly once we were both inside the tent with the rain fly zipped shut. "See, this isn't so bad," I told him, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. The darkness outside was unlike anything I'd experienced in the city. This wasn't the semi-darkness of streetlights and neon signs. This was absolute, primal blackness that seemed to press against the tent walls like a living thing. Every sound was amplified. The rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the creak and groan of tree branches, the steady drip of condensation from the leaves above. Cooper curled up against my sleeping bag, but his ears remained alert, tracking sounds I couldn't hear. I lay awake for hours, listening to the symphony of the forest night until exhaustion finally pulled me under. I dreamed of Marcus. In the dream, he was calling my name from somewhere outside the tent. His voice sounded distant, muffled, like he was speaking through water or from the bottom of a well. I tried to answer him, but my mouth wouldn't work, and when I reached for the tent zipper, my arms moved like they were underwater. "Jennifer," he called again, and this time his voice was closer. "Jennifer, I need you." I woke with a gasp, heart hammering against my ribs. The tent was gray with pre-dawn light, and Cooper was sitting bolt upright beside me, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The voice came again, clear and unmistakable. "Jennifer." It was Marcus's voice, but wrong somehow. The tone was right, the inflection familiar, but there was something hollow about it, like an echo of an echo. Cooper's growl deepened and the hair along his spine stood on end. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. Silence. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, straining to hear over the sound of my own breathing. Minutes passed, maybe hours, before Cooper finally relaxed and lay back down. I dozed fitfully until full daylight forced me to face the reality of the situation. Marcus was 300 miles away in Cleveland, probably sleeping in his new apartment with his new girlfriend. There was no way he could be here, no reason he would be here. I'd imagined it, that was all. A stress dream bleeding into wakefulness, my subconscious mind playing cruel tricks. But as I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cool morning air, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the soft earth around my campsite. Human footprints made by boots I recognized, the expensive hiking boots I'd bought Marcus for his birthday last year. Cooper sniffed at the prints and whined, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Pure, animal fear. "Okay," I said aloud, my voice shaky. "Okay, this is not happening." But the prints were there, clear as day in the morning light. They circled the tent, sometimes coming within inches of the rainfly. In one spot near the entrance, the print was so close and so deep that whoever made it must have been crouching down, listening. I grabbed my phone, knowing it was useless but needing the familiar weight of it in my hand. No signal, just as expected. The screen showed missed calls from my sister Sarah, 3 voicemails I couldn't access, and a text message that had somehow gotten through despite the lack of bars. "Hope you're having fun camping. Call me when you get back." The timestamp on the message was wrong, though. It showed yesterday's date, but the time was 3:47 a.m., hours after I'd lost signal. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and forced myself to think rationally. The footprints could belong to anyone. Another camper, a local who knew about this spot, maybe even the ranger doing his rounds. The fact that they looked like Marcus's boots was just coincidence. Memory playing tricks. The voice I'd heard was a dream, nothing more. But even as I tried to convince myself, Cooper remained on high alert, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. I spent the morning trying to shake off the unease. I hiked down to the stream and filtered water, explored the old homestead foundation, tried to identify bird calls using a field guide I'd brought, normal camping activities, normal explanations for everything. Cooper stayed close to my side, closer than usual, and refused to eat his breakfast. "Come on, boy," I coaxed, offering him his favorite treats. "You need to eat something." He sniffed the food and turned away, which wasn't like him at all. In 3 years, I'd never seen him refuse a meal. By afternoon, the October sun had warmed the clearing enough that I could sit outside in a t-shirt and read. I'd brought along a mystery novel, thinking it would be a good distraction, but I found myself reading the same page over and over, my attention constantly drawn to the shadows between the trees. That's when I saw him. A flash of movement in my peripheral vision, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. But Cooper saw it too. His head snapped up, ears forward, body tense. "Marcus," I called out, feeling foolish even as the word left my mouth. The forest swallowed my voice without echo. I stood up, shading my eyes against the afternoon sun. "I know someone's there. This isn't funny." A branch snapped somewhere to my left, deep in the trees. Then another, closer. The sounds were deliberate, too regular to be an animal. Cooper was growling again, the sound rising from deep in his chest like a diesel engine starting up. "Whoever you are, you need to leave," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "I have a gun." It was a lie. I'd never owned a gun in my life, but it seemed like the right thing to say. The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I became aware of how completely alone I was. Miles from the nearest road with no cell service and no way to call for help. The ranger station might as well have been on another planet. I gathered up my book and water bottle with shaking hands and retreated to my tent. Cooper pressed against my legs as we walked, his body rigid with tension. The rest of the afternoon passed in nervous quiet. I tried to nap but couldn't relax. Every sound outside, every rustle of leaves, every bird call sent adrenaline shooting through my system. Cooper lay across the tent entrance like a guard dog, alert and motionless. As evening approached, I realized I faced a terrible choice. pack up and try to drive out in the dark on unfamiliar forest roads, or spend another night in this place with whatever was out there. The thought of navigating those narrow, rutted roads in complete darkness with my nerves this frayed seemed almost as dangerous as staying. And leaving meant letting fear win, meant running away like I'd been running away from everything else in my life. I decided to stay. As the sun set and darkness began to seep into the clearing like black water, I built a small campfire using dead wood from around the old foundation. The flames pushed back the darkness by maybe 10 feet in each direction, creating a small bubble of light and warmth. Cooper sat beside me, but he wouldn't look at the fire. His attention was fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight, and his growling had become almost constant, a low, continuous rumble that vibrated through the ground. "It's okay, boy," I murmured, stroking his fur. "We're okay." But my words carried no conviction, and Cooper wasn't fooled. I heated up another can of soup for dinner, though my appetite had completely disappeared. The smell of chicken noodles seemed absurdly cheerful and domestic in the face of my growing terror. I forced myself to eat, knowing I'd need the energy, but every spoonful tasted like cardboard. That's when Marcus walked out of the trees. He emerged from the darkness beyond the firelight like he was stepping through a doorway. Casual as you please. Same brown hair, same lean build, same confident stride. He was wearing the clothes I'd last seen him in. Jeans, hiking boots, and the blue flannel shirt I'd bought him for Christmas. But his smile was wrong. Not wrong in any way I could articulate, but wrong in the way that sets off every alarm bell evolution has programmed into the human brain. Too wide. Too still. Like someone who'd learned to smile by watching other people do it but had never understood what it meant. Cooper erupted into a frenzy of barking and snarling unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. He threw himself toward Marcus, then jerked back as if hitting an invisible barrier, hackles raised, teeth bared, eyes rolling white with terror. "Hello, Jen," Marcus said, and even his voice was wrong, too flat, missing the subtle warmth that had made me fall in love with him 5 years ago. "I've been looking for you." I scrambled backward, nearly falling into the fire. "You can't be here. You're not here." "But I am here." He took a step closer, and the firelight caught his eyes. They were Marcus's eyes, the same green-flecked hazel I'd stared into across countless dinner tables and morning coffees, but they were empty now, like windows into an abandoned house. "How did you find me?" My voice was barely a whisper. "I followed you." Another step closer. Cooper was going insane, barking and snapping at the air, but Marcus didn't seem to notice. "It wasn't hard. You always were predictable, Jen. Always running away when things got difficult." The words hit like physical blows. They were things Marcus had said during our worst fights, accusations that had cut deep because they contained just enough truth to hurt. "You're not Marcus," I managed to say. "Of course I'm Marcus." The thing wearing his face tilted its head, studying me with those empty eyes. Who else would I be? Cooper was backing away now, pressed against my legs, still growling but no longer trying to attack. Whatever this thing was, even my brave, loyal dog recognized it as something beyond normal threat. "Marcus is in Cleveland," I said, clinging to the facts like a lifeline. "Marcus moved out 3 months ago. Marcus is dating someone new." "Is he?" The thing smiled that horrible smile again. "Are you sure?" I blinked, and suddenly I wasn't sure of anything. The certainty that had anchored me began to slip away like sand through my fingers. Marcus had moved out, hadn't he? Or had that been a dream? Was I still married? Was I still in Cleveland? "You're confused," the thing said gently, taking another step closer. The firelight seemed to bend around it in impossible ways, creating shadows that moved independently of its body. "You've been out here too long. Alone. Too long. Let me help you." It reached out one hand, Marcus's hand with the scar on the knuckle from when he'd cut himself fixing our garbage disposal. The gesture was achingly familiar, and for a moment I almost stepped forward. but Cooper's terrified whimpering stopped me. I looked down at my dog, saw the whites of his eyes, saw how he was trembling despite his size and strength. Cooper had never been afraid of Marcus. Even during our worst fights, even when voices were raised and doors were slammed, Cooper had always been calm around my husband. This wasn't Marcus. "Get away from me," I said, my voice growing stronger. The thing's face didn't change, but something shifted in its posture. The pretense of humanity slipped just for a moment, and I caught a glimpse of something else underneath, something tall and wrong and hungry. "You're being difficult," it said, and now Marcus's voice carried undertones of something else, something that had never learned human speech but was doing its best to approximate it. I grabbed a burning branch from the fire and held it between us like a weapon. The flames cast dancing shadows across the thing's face, and for a split second I saw it clearly. Not Marcus at all, but something that wore his appearance like an ill-fitting mask. It stepped back, but not from fear of the fire. It stepped back because its disguise was slipping, and it needed distance to pull the mask back into place. "You always were clever," it said, and Marcus's smile returned. "That's what I loved about you." But it was retreating into the darkness, and as it moved away from the fire, its edges began to blur and shift. The last thing I saw was Marcus's face, perfect in every detail except for those empty, hungry eyes. Then it was gone, swallowed by the night as if it had never been there at all. Cooper pressed against my legs, no longer growling but shaking like a leaf. I sank to my knees beside him, wrapping my arms around his neck, feeling his rapid heartbeat against my chest. We stayed like that for hours, huddled together by the fire, jumping at every sound. I fed stick after stick into the flames, determined to keep the darkness at bay, but even the fire seemed wrong now. The flames burned too blue, too cold, casting shadows that moved when they should have been still. Around midnight my phone buzzed with an incoming text. Impossible. There was no signal here, but the screen lit up with a message from Marcus's number. "Why won't you let me help you?" I turned the phone off and threw it into my backpack, but I could swear I still felt it vibrating against the fabric. The rest of the night passed in a haze of terror and exhaustion. I dozed fitfully, always jerking awake at the slightest sound. Cooper never slept at all, maintaining his vigilant watch of the darkness beyond the firelight. When dawn finally came, gray and weak through the overcast sky, I made a decision. We were leaving. Now. I broke camp with shaking hands, stuffing gear into bags without bothering to organize anything properly. Cooper stayed pressed against my legs the entire time, as if he was afraid to let me out of his sight. The footprints from the previous morning were gone, erased as if they had never existed, but new ones had appeared. Dozens of them, circling the campsite in an endless loop. Some looked like Marcus's boots. Others were bare feet, impossibly long and narrow. A few weren't human at all. I threw the last of my gear into the car and grabbed Cooper's leash, but he was already jumping into the passenger seat. He wanted out of this place as badly as I did. The engine turned over on the third try, and I'd never been so grateful to hear the rumble of internal combustion. I threw the car into reverse and began backing toward the Forest Service road, not caring about the scrapes and scratches as branches dragged against the paint. That's when I saw Marcus standing at the edge of the clearing, not the thing that had pretended to be Marcus. This was different somehow, smaller, more solid, more real. He was wearing different clothes I didn't recognize. His hair was shorter than I remembered, and when he raised his hand to wave at me, the gesture was completely natural, completely him. "Jen," he called out, and his voice carried the warmth and inflection I'd fallen in love with. "Jen, wait." I slammed on the brakes, confusion and hope warring in my chest. This was Marcus. Really, Marcus. I could feel it in my bones, in the way my heart skipped when he smiled. But Cooper was going crazy again, barking and snarling and throwing himself against the passenger window. "Jen, I've been looking everywhere for you." Marcus jogged toward the car, and his movement was exactly right. the slight favor of his left leg from an old soccer injury, the way he pumped his arms when he ran. Your sister called me when you didn't check in. I drove all night to find you. It made sense. Sarah would have called him if she couldn't reach me. Marcus would have dropped everything to help, despite our divorce. It was exactly what he would do. I reached for the door handle. Cooper's barking reached a fever pitch, and he began clawing at the window, desperate to get to me. His eyes were wild with terror, and flecks of foam flew from his mouth. I hesitated, my hand on the door handle, looking from Marcus to my dog and back again. Marcus had stopped running. He stood maybe 20 feet away, close enough that I could see the concern in his eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the small mole beside his left ear. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except Cooper. Cooper, who had lived with Marcus for 2 years. Cooper, who had mourned when Marcus moved out, spending days searching the apartment for his missing human. Cooper, who still got excited when I said Marcus's name. Cooper was terrified. I looked back at Marcus, really looked, and saw it. The slight wrongness in his posture, the too perfect replication of mannerisms I'd seen 1,000 times. It was like watching an actor who had studied their role so thoroughly they could mimic every gesture, but still couldn't capture the essential spark that made the person real. "You're not him," I whispered. Marcus's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. The concern became calculation. The love became hunger. "Of course I'm him," he said, still in Marcus's voice. "Who else would I be?" I gunned the engine and shot backward onto the Forest Service road, tires spinning in the loose gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw Marcus standing motionless in the clearing, watching me go with that same empty stare I'd seen the night before. Then the trees swallowed him, and I was racing down the narrow road as fast as I dared, Cooper whimpering beside me. The drive out was a nightmare of switchbacks and ruts, branches scraping against the car like grasping fingers. Twice I had to get out and move fallen logs that hadn't been there on the way in. Each time, Cooper refused to let me go alone, pressing against my legs as I worked. When we finally reached the paved road, I pulled over and sat shaking behind the wheel for 10 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. Cooper had calmed down somewhat, but he kept looking back toward the forest, hackles still raised. I drove straight to the ranger station, my story already forming in my mind. I would report a trespasser, someone impersonating my ex-husband, someone who had been stalking my campsite. But when I walked through the door, the ranger took one look at me and reached for his radio. "Jesus, lady, what happened to you?" I caught my reflection in the window behind him and understood his alarm. My face was scratched from branches I didn't remember encountering. My clothes were torn and dirty. My hair was matted with leaves and debris. I looked like I'd been running through the forest for hours. "How long was I gone?" I asked. The ranger frowned. "Gone? You just checked in yesterday morning. Said you were going to the old homestead site for 3 days. Yesterday?" I pulled out my phone, which had somehow turned itself back on. The date on the screen made my blood run cold. I'd been in the forest for 6 days. But I only remembered 2. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. 6 days. What had happened to the other 4? "There was someone at my campsite," I managed to say. "Someone who shouldn't have been there." The ranger nodded sympathetically. "We get that sometimes. Kids from town usually, thinking it's funny to mess with campers. Did they take anything?" "No, they pretended to be someone I knew. My ex-husband." "That's weird." He made a note on a form. "Did you get a good look at him?" I almost laughed. A good look? I'd gotten the best look possible. Every detail perfect, down to the scar on his knuckle and the mole beside his ear. "Yes," I said. "I got a very good look." The drive home passed in a blur. Cooper slept in the passenger seat, exhausted by our ordeal, but he kept twitching and whimpering in his dreams. I envied him. At least he was able to sleep. I tried calling Marcus from a gas station outside Portsmouth, but his number went straight to voicemail. His voice on the recording sounded strange to my ears, too flat, too empty, just like the thing in the forest. But that was impossible. The Marcus on my voicemail was a recording, nothing more. Digital compression could explain the flatness. Stress and lack of sleep could explain my paranoia. When I got home, I found 7 missed calls from Sarah and a dozen text messages asking where I was. I called her back from my landline, not trusting my cell phone. "Jen, thank God. I've been worried sick. You said you'd check in every day. I'm sorry, no signal in the forest. Did you have a good time? You sound weird." I almost told her everything, about the footprints and the voices and the thing that wore Marcus's face. But how could I explain something I didn't understand myself? "It was educational," I said finally. That night, I triple-checked the locks on my apartment door and closed all the blinds. Cooper refused to sleep in his usual spot by the window. Instead, he lay across the bedroom doorway, blocking the entrance with his body. I lay awake until dawn, listening to every sound in the building. Footsteps in the hallway above, the elevator's mechanical hum, the whisper of wind through the ventilation system. And sometime around 3 a.m., I could have sworn I heard Marcus's voice calling my name from outside my window. But I lived on the 14th floor. I tried to return to normal life. I went back to work at the marketing firm where I'd been employed for 6 years. I had lunch with friends. I took Cooper to the dog park and watched him play with other dogs, though he seemed subdued, always staying close to my side. But normal felt like a lie now. The first sign that something had followed me home came 3 days after my return. I was making coffee in the morning when I noticed Cooper staring at the front door, his body rigid with attention. "What is it, boy?" He whined softly, the same sound he'd made in the forest. I looked through the peephole and saw an empty hallway, but when I opened the door to get my newspaper, there were muddy footprints leading from the elevator to my door, boot prints that looked exactly like the ones I'd found at my campsite. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, emerged from the apartment across the hall, carrying her small white terrier. "Good morning, Jennifer," she said cheerfully. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Mrs. Chen, did you see anyone in the hallway this morning? Someone with muddy boots?" She looked puzzled. "No, dear, just the usual residents. Are you feeling all right? You look pale." I looked down at the footprints, clear as day in the carpet. "Mrs." Chen followed my gaze. "Oh my, someone certainly made a mess. I'll have to speak to the building manager about getting this cleaned." She could see them too. The prints were real. But who had made them? That evening, I called my sister and asked if she'd heard from Marcus recently. "Marcus? No, why would I? You two are divorced, remember?" "I know, when I was camping, I thought I saw him. I was wondering if he'd mentioned driving down to Ohio for any reason." "Jen, are you sure you're okay? You've been acting strange since you got back from that trip." "I'm fine, just curious." But I wasn't fine, and we both knew it. The incidents escalated over the following week. My phone would ring in the middle of the night displaying Marcus's number, but when I answered, there was only breathing on the other end. I would come home from work to find my apartment door unlocked, though I was certain I'd locked it. Cooper became increasingly agitated, often staring at empty corners and whining. Then, exactly 1 week after my return from the forest, Marcus showed up at my office. I was in a meeting with clients when my assistant knocked on the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." "Can't it wait? We're in the middle of—" "He says he's your husband." The words hit me like cold water. "My ex-husband, you mean?" She looked confused. "No, he said husband. He seemed pretty insistent about it." I excused myself from the meeting and walked to the reception area on unsteady legs. Marcus was standing by the window, looking out at the city street below. He turned when he heard my footsteps, and his smile was warm and genuine. "Hi, Jen. Sorry to bother you at work." He looked completely normal, completely real. The same Marcus I'd been married to for 4 years, down to the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other when he was nervous. "What are you doing here?" I kept my voice low, aware of my coworkers watching from their desks. I was worried about you. Sarah said you went camping alone, and when you didn't call—" He shrugged, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. "I know we're not together anymore, but I still care about you." It sounded exactly like something Marcus would say. The concern in his voice was genuine. The way he stood with his hands in his pockets was perfectly him. But Cooper wasn't here to warn me. "How did you know where I work?" I asked. He looked surprised by the question. "What do you mean? I've picked you up here before. Remember when your car was in the shop?" I did remember, but that was over a year ago, and he'd never been to my current office. We'd moved buildings 6 months after the separation. "You were never here," I said carefully. "We moved offices after you moved out." His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Of course I was here. Don't you remember? We had lunch at that little cafe down the street." The gaslighting was subtle but unmistakable, making me doubt my own memory, my own reality. It was a manipulation tactic Marcus had never used. He'd had his faults, but dishonesty wasn't one of them. "I need to get back to my meeting," I said. "Jen, wait." He reached for my arm and I jerked away instinctively. His touch felt wrong. Too cold, too firm. "We need to talk. There are things I need to tell you. Things about what happened in the forest." My blood turned to ice. "What do you know about the forest?" "I know you saw something that frightened you. I know you're having trouble sleeping. I know you're questioning your own sanity." He stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of something that definitely wasn't Marcus's cologne. Something earthy and organic, like decomposing leaves. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I was there, Jen. I've been trying to help you understand, but you keep running away." "Security," I said loudly, looking toward the reception desk. "I need security." But my assistant was nowhere to be seen. The reception area was empty except for Marcus and me, though I could have sworn there had been other people here moments before. "There's no one here, Jen. Just us." I looked around wildly. The office beyond the reception area was dark and silent. The conference room where I'd left my clients was empty, chairs pushed in around a table that showed no signs of recent use. "This isn't real," I whispered. "What's real?" Marcus asked gently. "The forest was real. The thing you saw was real. I'm real." "You're not Marcus." "Then who am I?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I opened my mouth to answer but found I couldn't. Because looking at him now, in the fluorescent lights of my office building, he seemed exactly like Marcus. Every detail was perfect, from the small scar above his eyebrow to the way he worried at his thumbnail when he was nervous. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe the stress of the divorce, combined with several days alone in the wilderness, had triggered some kind of psychotic break. Maybe this was all in my head. "I can help you," he said, reaching out again. "But you have to trust me. You have to stop running." This time, I didn't pull away when he touched my arm. His hand was warm and solid and real. But in the reflection of the window behind him, I saw something that stopped my heart. The reflection showed the reception area as it really was, bustling with activity, my coworkers at their desks, my assistant answering phones. And where Marcus stood beside me, the reflection showed empty space. He cast no reflection. I yanked my arm away and ran for the elevator, not looking back. Behind me, I heard Marcus call my name, but his voice was changing, becoming hollow and strange. The elevator doors closed just as something that was definitely not Marcus reached them. I drove straight home, packed a bag for Cooper and myself, and checked into a hotel on the other side of town. I paid cash and used a fake name, knowing it wouldn't really matter but needing to feel like I was doing something to protect myself. That night, alone in the hotel room with Cooper pressed against my legs, I tried to make sense of what was happening to me. Option 1. I was having a complete psychological breakdown. The stress of my divorce, combined with several days of isolation in the wilderness, had triggered hallucinations and paranoid delusions. The thing in the forest was a manifestation of my guilt and unresolved feelings about Marcus. The subsequent encounters were my brain's way of processing trauma. Option 2, I had encountered something in those woods that was now stalking me. Something that could take the form of people I knew, but couldn't quite get the details right. Something that was slowly working its way into my life, replacing my reality with its own version. Both options terrified me. But when Cooper began growling at the hotel room door around 2 a.m., I knew which one was true. The knocking started soft and tentative, like someone who wasn't sure they had the right room. "Jen, I know you're in there." Marcus's voice muffled by the door but unmistakably his. "Please, we need to talk. I can explain everything." Cooper was backing away from the door, whimpering. I grabbed his leash and my car keys, but before I could reach the window, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. I called the front desk from the room phone, but no one answered. The hotel seemed to have fallen into the same unnatural quiet I'd experienced in my office. Then I heard the key card sliding into the door lock. The little light flashed green, and the door began to open. I grabbed Cooper and bolted for the bathroom, slamming the door behind us and turning the lock. It was flimsy protection, but it was all I had. "Jen, this is silly," Marcus said from the other side of the bathroom door. "You can't hide from me forever." "What do you want?" I managed to say. "I want to help you. You're sick, Jen. Confused. Let me take care of you." "You're not real." "I'm as real as you are. More real, maybe. You've been running from reality for so long, you've forgotten what it looks like." The gaslighting again, subtle and insidious, making me doubt my own perceptions, my own sanity. "I know what I saw in the forest," I said. "You're not Marcus." "Then who am I?" The same question he'd asked before, and I still didn't have an answer, because the truth was too impossible to accept. I had encountered something in those woods that existed in the spaces between reality and nightmare, something that fed on human connection, human memory, human love, something that wore the faces of the people we missed most. The bathroom door handle rattled. "Open the door, Jen." I pressed my back against the far wall, Cooper trembling in my arms. The handle turned all the way, but the lock held. For now. "I'm calling the police," I said. Marcus laughed, and for the first time his voice carried no warmth at all. "Go ahead. Tell them your dead ex-husband is stalking you." "Dead?" The word came out as a whisper. "You didn't know? The car accident was 3 days ago. The funeral is tomorrow." My legs gave out, and I slid down the bathroom wall to sit on the cold tile floor. Cooper pressed against me, and I could feel his rapid heartbeat through his fur. "You're lying." "Check your phone. Check the news. Marcus Williams, age 36, killed when his car left the road during a rainstorm outside Cleveland. The police think he fell asleep at the wheel." With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. The hotel had Wi-Fi, and news websites loaded slowly on the small screen. I searched for Marcus's name, praying I wouldn't find anything. The headline made my vision gray around the edges. "Local man dies in single-car accident." Below, it was Marcus's photo, the same photo from his LinkedIn profile, the one I'd helped him take 2 years ago. The accident had happened 4 days ago, while I was in the hotel, thinking I was hiding from him. Marcus had been dead since before I'd even gotten home from camping. "Now, do you understand?" the thing wearing his voice said from the other side of the door. "I'm all that's left of him. His last thoughts were of you, Jen. His regret, his love, his desperate need to make things right between you. I'm his ghost, his echo, his unfinished business." I stared at the phone screen until the words blurred together. The Marcus I'd encountered in the forest, the one who'd shown up at my office, the one standing outside this bathroom door, none of them had been real. But they weren't hallucinations either. "What are you?" I whispered. "I'm what happens when love doesn't die with the body. I'm what's left behind when someone dies with things left unsaid, forgiveness left ungiven. I'm the part of Marcus that couldn't let you go." The lock clicked, and the bathroom door swung open. Marcus stood in the doorway, but he was changing now, the careful human facade melting away like wax in heat. He was taller than he should be, his limbs too long, his face a shifting amalgamation of every expression I'd ever seen him wear. Behind him, the hotel room was gone, replaced by the dark trees and looming shadows of the Ohio forest. "I tried to be gentle," he said, and his voice was layered now, multiple tones speaking in harmony. "I tried to ease you into understanding, but you keep fighting me." Cooper was growling again, but even my brave dog was pressed against the back wall, too terrified to attack. "I don't want to be eased into anything," I said, finding my voice. "I want you to leave me alone." "I can't do that. Marcus loved you too much. He died thinking about you, regretting the way things ended. That kind of love, it leaves a mark. It creates things that weren't there before." The thing stepped into the bathroom and reality warped around it. The walls stretched upward until they disappeared into darkness. The floor beneath me became soft earth scattered with dead leaves. I could smell the forest, hear the wind through branches that shouldn't exist. "I can give you everything Marcus wanted to give you," it continued. "Love without anger, without the petty fights and everyday disappointments. Love pure and perfect and eternal." "That's not love," I said. "That's obsession." "Is there a difference?" It reached for me with hands that were sometimes Marcus's and sometimes something else entirely, long-fingered and pale with too many joints. Cooper chose that moment to attack. My dog, who had been too terrified to move, suddenly launched himself at the thing with all the fury of a wolf protecting its pack. He hit it center mass, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs and teeth and inhuman screaming. The thing's perfect Marcus facade shattered completely, revealing something underneath that my mind refused to process. A shifting, writhing mass of shadow and hunger that wore fragments of human features like broken masks. Cooper's attack had given me the opening I needed. I scrambled over their struggling forms and ran for the door that led back to the hotel room, if it still existed. It did, barely. The walls flickered between wood paneling and tree bark, the carpet shifting between industrial fibers and forest loam. I grabbed my car keys from the nightstand and headed for the window, which was sometimes a window and sometimes a gap between trees. Behind me, Cooper's barking had turned to yelping, then to silence. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I kicked out the window screen and dropped 8 feet to the parking lot below, landing hard on asphalt that felt solid and real under my hands. My car was where I'd left it, and the engine started on the first try. I drove without stopping for 6 hours, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that hotel, between myself and the thing that had worn Marcus's face. Cooper was gone. I knew it with the certainty of absolute loss, felt his absence like a physical wound. He had died protecting me from something that should never have existed. When I finally stopped at a truck stop outside Pittsburgh, I called Sarah from a payphone. "Jen, where are you? I've been trying to reach you for days." "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. When did Marcus die?" Silence on the other end of the line. "Sarah." "Jen, Marcus isn't dead. He called me yesterday asking if I'd heard from you. He's worried sick." "That's impossible. I saw the news article. The car accident." "What news article? Jen, you're scaring me. Where are you?" I hung up the phone and stood in the fluorescent lights of the truck stop, surrounded by the normal sounds of normal people living normal lives. Truckers buying coffee, families stretching their legs on long road trips. The mundane machinery of a world that made sense. But I no longer lived in that world. I bought a burner phone and used it to search for news of Marcus's death. I found nothing. No accident reports, no obituaries, no funeral announcements. According to every official record I could access, Marcus Williams was alive and well and living in Cleveland. But I had seen him die in that hotel bathroom, had watched his human mask dissolve into something else entirely, which meant one of two things. Either I had suffered a complete psychotic break, or reality itself was more fragile than I'd ever imagined. I chose to believe in my own sanity, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. I drove south, then west, then south again, following no plan except the need to keep moving. The thing, whatever it was, had found me twice in places I thought were safe. Geography wasn't protection. Locks and walls weren't protection. But distance might be. Time might be. I rented a cabin in the mountains of North Carolina, paid 6 months in advance with cash, and settled in to wait. For what? I wasn't sure. For the thing to find me again, maybe. For my sanity to finally snap completely. For the world to make sense again. None of those things happened. Instead, I lived in isolation, jumping at every sound, sleeping with the lights on, waiting for Marcus's voice to call my name from the darkness outside my windows. But the voice never came. Weeks passed. Then months. I began to think I might have escaped, that whatever I'd encountered in the Ohio woods had been left behind. I was wrong. It found me on a warm, spring evening, 6 months after that night in the hotel. I was sitting on the cabin's front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple when I heard footsteps on the gravel drive. Cooper came trotting around the bend in the road, tail wagging, completely unharmed. Behind him walked Marcus, looking exactly as he had the day he'd moved out of our apartment. Same clothes, same hairstyle, same easy smile. "Hey, Jen," he called out, raising one hand in greeting. "I've been looking for you." I sat frozen on the porch steps, watching them approach. Cooper bounded up to me with his usual enthusiasm, jumping up to lick my face, solid and warm and real. But when I looked into his eyes, they were empty. Just like Marcus's. "We missed you," Marcus said, settling down beside me on the steps. "It's been lonely without you." I didn't run this time. There was nowhere left to go. The thing had taken Cooper's form as well as Marcus's, and now it was complete. A perfect recreation of the life I'd lost, the love I'd mourned. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Just what we've always wanted," Marcus said gently. "To be with you, to love you, forever." Cooper, the thing wearing Cooper's form, curled up at my feet, just as he had every evening for 3 years. The perfect picture of domestic contentment. "You can't have forever," I said. "Nothing lasts forever." "We will," Marcus replied. "Love like ours transcends death, transcends flesh, transcends reality itself. We'll never fight again, never hurt each other, never grow apart. We'll be exactly what we were in our best moments, preserved like insects in amber." It was a beautiful offer. A perfect life with perfect love, unmarred by the small cruelties and daily disappointments that had driven us apart in the real world. All I had to do was surrender my grip on reality and let the thing remake me in its own image. And if I say no? Marcus's smile didn't change, but something cold moved behind his eyes. "You won't say no. You love us too much, just like we love you." He was right, of course. I did love them, both of them. Even knowing what they really were, I felt the old familiar warmth when Marcus smiled, the old contentment when Cooper pressed against my legs. The thing understood human love better than humans did. It knew exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to exploit the desperate need for connection that lives in every human heart. But it had made one crucial mistake. Real love isn't perfect. Real love is messy and complicated and shot through with pain and disappointment and growth. Real love changes and evolves and sometimes ends. The love this thing offered was a museum display, beautiful but static, trapped behind glass, forever unchanging. "I do love you," I told them, "but you're not them. You're just echoes, shadows, reflections of what I've lost." and I can't live in a world of shadows. I stood up and walked into the cabin, leaving them on the porch. Behind me, I heard Marcus call my name, but his voice was already changing, becoming hollow and strange. I grabbed the gasoline can I'd bought for the generator and began splashing fuel around the cabin's interior. On books Marcus had given me, on photographs of our wedding, on Cooper's favorite tennis ball. By the time I lit the match, they were both standing in the doorway, no longer bothering to maintain their human appearances. The things that had been Marcus and Cooper were tall and wrong and hungry, their borrowed faces slipping like masks in rain. "You can't escape us," the Marcus thing said. "We're part of you now. We live in your memories, your dreams, your love." "I know," I said, and dropped the match. The cabin went up like a bonfire, flames reaching toward the darkening sky. I walked out through the back door as the fire consumed everything I'd brought with me from my old life. The things didn't follow me. They couldn't. They were made of memory and longing, and I had just burned those memories to ash. That was 2 years ago. I live differently now. I don't keep photographs or mementos. I don't linger over memories of the people I've loved and lost. I stay in motion, never spending more than a few months in any one place. Sometimes I catch glimpses of them. Marcus at a coffee shop in Portland, Cooper running through a park in Denver. But they're fainter now, translucent, like mirages on summer asphalt. The thing that feeds on love and memory is still out there, I'm sure, still lurking in the spaces between what is and what we wish could be. Still waiting for someone else to wander too deep into the woods with an aching heart and desperate need. But it can't touch me anymore. I've learned to love differently, lightly, without attachment, without the deep roots that give such creatures purchase in our souls. I miss Marcus. I miss Cooper. I miss the life we had together, imperfect as it was. But I've learned that some kinds of love are too dangerous to hold on to. Some ghosts are better left buried, and some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again. I'm writing this in a hotel room in Tucson, Arizona, 3 days after I saw Marcus standing outside a gas station, watching me pump fuel into my car. He looked exactly as he had in life, down to the small scar above his eyebrow. But when I looked closer, I could see the cracks in his facade, the way his smile was a half-second too slow, the way his eyes didn't quite track my movement. The thing is still out there, still wearing the faces of the people I love. But it's fading. Each year, each mile, each deliberate act of forgetting weakens its hold on reality. Someday, maybe, it will fade entirely. Until then, I keep moving. I keep forgetting. And I never, ever go camping alone. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the Wayne National Forest in southeastern Ohio during what was supposed to be a 3-day hiking trip with my closest friends. I'm writing this down because the police won't believe me. The search teams found nothing, and the nightmares won't stop. Maybe if I get it all out, the images will leave me alone. Maybe. But I know they won't. The trip was Emma's idea. Emma Collins, my college roommate and the kind of person who collected experiences like other people collected stamps. She'd been planning this autumn hike for months, poring over trail maps and weather forecasts with the obsessive precision that made her such a good accountant. "The colors will be perfect," she kept saying, showing us pictures on her phone of sugar maples and hickories painted in brilliant reds and golds. "And the Buckeye Trail through Wayne is supposed to be incredible this time of year." Our third member was Jessica Davis, Emma's co-worker and my friend by proximity. Jess was quiet where Emma was enthusiastic, practical where Emma was dreamy. She'd grown up in rural Kentucky and knew more about camping than Emma and I combined. When Emma suggested we tackle a section of the Buckeye Trail that connected to some lesser-known paths, Jess had been the one to research permits and pack lists. I should have paid more attention to the stories Jess mentioned in passing, local legends about that particular stretch of forest. She'd laughed them off as hillbilly nonsense, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she didn't entirely disbelieve them. Stories about people who went into the deep woods and came back different, changed in ways that couldn't be explained. We started our hike on a Friday morning in late October, parking Emma's Honda at the Liberty Township trailhead just as the sun burned through the morning mist. The temperature was perfect, cool enough for comfortable hiking, warm enough that we didn't need heavy jackets. The forest was spectacular, exactly as Emma had promised. Ancient oaks and maples formed a canopy overhead, their leaves creating a stained glass ceiling of amber, scarlet, and gold. Our boots crunched through the fallen leaves as we followed the blue blazes of the Buckeye Trail deeper into the woods. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. We fell into the easy rhythm of longtime friends. Emma chattering about her latest online dating disasters, Jess offering dry commentary, me laughing at both of them. The trail was well-marked and well-maintained, winding through stands of beech and hickory, past small clearings where wildflowers still bloomed despite the season. It was around noon when we reached the junction where the Buckeye Trail intersected with an older, less maintained path that Jess had found on an obscure hiking website. According to her research, this trail, unmarked on most maps, led to a series of natural rock formations and a small waterfall that few people knew about. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, looking at the narrow dirt path that disappeared into a thicker section of forest. The trees here seemed older, their trunks massive and gnarled, their branches forming such a dense canopy that the light beneath was dim and green-tinged. "It's supposed to be amazing," Jess said, consulting her GPS, "and it'll loop back to the main trail about 5 miles ahead. We'll save time and see something special." Emma was already shouldering her pack, her eyes bright with adventure lust. "Come on, Sarah. When's the next time we'll all have 3 days to do something like this?" So we left the marked trail. The unmarked path was beautiful in its wildness, but there was something unsettling about it too. The silence was too complete. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Our footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, and our voices carried strangely, sometimes seeming to echo when there was nothing to echo off, sometimes being swallowed completely by the dense air. After about an hour on the unmarked trail, Jess stopped and frowned at her GPS unit. "That's weird," she said, tapping the screen. "It's showing our location, but the trail we're on isn't appearing on the map. It's like we're walking through blank space." Emma peered over her shoulder. "Maybe it's just too minor to show up? Or the satellite signal is wonky under all these trees?" But I noticed that Jess looked troubled as she tucked the GPS away. She kept pulling it out every few minutes, her frown deepening each time. The first truly strange thing happened around 3 o'clock. We'd been hiking for about 6 hours total, and decided to take a break in a small clearing where a massive oak tree had fallen, creating a natural bench. As we sat eating trail mix and drinking water, Emma pulled out her phone to take pictures. "God, this place is gorgeous," she said, snapping photos of the clearing, the fallen tree, us sitting together. She'd taken maybe a dozen pictures when she suddenly stopped, staring at her phone screen. "What's wrong?" I asked. "These pictures—" Emma's voice was confused. "They're not showing up right." She handed me her phone. The photos were there, but they were wrong. In every single image there was a fourth figure. A tall, thin shadow standing just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible among the trees. In some photos, it looked almost human. In others, it seemed too long, too twisted to be anything natural. "It's just a tree shadow," Jess said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The light's playing tricks." We all looked toward the edge of the clearing where the shadow appeared in the photos. There were trees there, yes, but nothing that could have cast such a distinct, human-like silhouette. Emma deleted the photos. All of them. We pressed on, but the mood had shifted. The easy chatter died away, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the sound of our breathing and the crunch of leaves underfoot. The path began to descend more steeply, leading us into a narrow ravine where the trees pressed closer together and the air felt thick and still. It was in this ravine that we lost the trail entirely. One moment we were following a clear dirt path between two moss-covered boulders. The next, we were standing in a small grove of ancient hemlocks with no trail visible in any direction. We backtracked, searching for the path, but it was as if it had simply vanished. "This doesn't make sense," Jess said, consulting her GPS again. The device showed our location as a blue dot in what appeared to be empty forest, with no trails marked anywhere nearby. We were just on the path. It was right here. We spent an hour searching, fanning out in different directions but staying within shouting distance of each other. The forest around us was eerily uniform. Endless rows of dark hemlocks and ancient oaks, their trunks so thick it would take 3 people holding hands to encircle them. Everything looked the same. Every direction looked the same. As the afternoon light began to fade, filtering weakly through the dense canopy, we made the decision to make camp and wait for morning to reorient ourselves. We found a relatively flat spot between 2 large boulders and set up our tents in a tight triangle, as if proximity could protect us from whatever was making all 3 of us feel watched. The campfire wouldn't light. Jess was experienced with outdoor fires, and we had good, dry kindling and proper matches. But every time she struck a match, the flame would gutter and die before it could catch the tinder. The wood wasn't damp. It crackled when broken and felt bone dry, but it simply wouldn't burn. "I don't understand this," Jess muttered, striking her 10th match. This one flared bright blue for just an instant before dying. "The conditions are perfect. This should work." We ended up eating cold food and huddling together as darkness fell around us with unnatural speed. One moment there was still light filtering through the trees. The next we were surrounded by a blackness so complete it felt solid. Our flashlights created small, weak bubbles of illumination that seemed to be pushed back by the darkness. That first night we heard the crying. It started around midnight, the sound of a child sobbing, somewhere out in the forest. The sound was heartbreaking and wrong, echoing strangely among the trees. Sometimes it seemed to come from the north, sometimes from the south, sometimes from directly overhead in the canopy. "We should check it out," Emma whispered from her tent. "What if someone's lost out there? What if there's a child who needs help?" "No." Jess's voice was sharp. "Absolutely not. We stay in our tents until morning." "But no, Emma. Trust me on this." The crying continued for hours, moving around our campsite in slow circles. Sometimes it would fade to almost nothing, and we'd think it was over. Then it would return, closer than before, so close it seemed like the child was standing just outside the ring of our tents. None of us slept that night. When morning finally came, it came wrong. The light was gray and sickly, and when I checked my watch it read 11:47 a.m. That couldn't be right. We'd been awake since before dawn, listening to that horrible crying. But all 3 of our watches showed the same impossible time. We broke camp quickly and tried to retrace our steps to find the main trail. But the forest had changed overnight. The grove, where we'd lost the path, was gone, replaced by a steep slope covered in thorny undergrowth. The massive boulders we'd camped between had somehow moved, now standing in different positions, and everywhere we looked the trees were wrong, twisted into shapes that hurt to look at directly. "This isn't possible," Emma kept saying. "Forests don't just rearrange themselves. This isn't possible." But it was happening. We picked a direction that felt right and started walking, hoping to intersect the main trail or at least find some landmark we could identify. The GPS was useless now. It showed our position as a blue dot floating in white space, with no features, no trails, no reference points of any kind. We walked for hours through the twisted forest, past trees that grew in impossible spirals and clearings where the grass was black and brittle. The silence was oppressive, broken only by our footsteps and increasingly labored breathing. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the sound of 3 people trying not to panic. It was Emma who found the camp. We'd been walking for what felt like most of the day when she suddenly stopped and pointed ahead. Through the trees, barely visible, was the orange fabric of a tent. "Thank God," she breathed. "Other people. They can help us get back to the trail." But as we approached, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. The camp was wrong. The tent was our tent. The same model, the same color, set up in exactly the same configuration we'd used the night before, and around it, in the same positions, were the two large boulders. "This is where we camped last night," Jess said quietly. "We walked all day in a straight line, and we're back where we started." Emma was shaking her head, backing away from the impossible campsite. No, this isn't the same place. It can't be. We walked for hours. We went uphill. This is some kind of mistake." But there was the cold ring of stones where we'd tried to build our fire. There was the depression in the earth where my tent had been. And hanging from a tree branch, caught by the wind, was the granola bar wrapper I'd dropped the night before. That was when Emma started screaming. It wasn't fear or frustration. It was something deeper, the sound of a mind beginning to crack under the weight of impossibility. She screamed until her voice gave out, then collapsed to her knees in the leaves, sobbing. Jess and I got her calmed down and set up camp again as the light began to fade. What else could we do? We were lost in a forest that didn't follow the rules of geography or time, with no working GPS and no trail to follow. The second night was worse than the first. The crying started earlier this time, just as full darkness fell. But now there were multiple voices. A chorus of children weeping somewhere in the black forest around us, and underneath the crying, barely audible, was something else. Whispering. Words we couldn't quite make out, in voices that sounded almost familiar. Around 2 a.m., Emma's tent zipper started moving. I was lying awake in my sleeping bag, staring at the dark ceiling of my tent and trying not to listen to the sounds outside, when I heard the slow, deliberate rasp of a zipper being pulled. It was coming from Emma's tent, about 6 feet to my left. "Emma," I whispered, "you okay?" No answer, just the continued sound of the zipper, opening inch by inch with mechanical precision. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my own tent far enough to stick my head out. Emma's tent was partially open, the zipper pulled down about halfway, but I could see her silhouette inside, lying motionless in her sleeping bag. "Emma," I called, louder this time. She sat up suddenly, and I heard her gasp. "What? What's happening?" "Your tent zipper was opening." "What? No, I've been asleep. I didn't touch the zipper." But even as she said it, the zipper continued its slow descent, opening the tent completely. Emma scrambled out, her face pale in the light of my flashlight. "I wasn't touching it," she said. "I swear I wasn't touching it." The three of us spent the rest of the night huddled together in Jess's tent, listening to sounds that had no source we could identify. Footsteps circling our campsite, the rustle of something large moving through the underbrush, and always, the whispering and crying that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. When morning came, another wrong morning that arrived hours late according to our watches, we found our backpacks scattered around the campsite. The contents were spilled across the ground, our food supplies rotten and covered in a black mold that stank of decay. Everything we'd packed carefully just 3 days ago was ruined, as if it had been sitting in a swamp for months, all except for one thing. Emma's pack, which had been sitting next to her tent, was untouched, clean and dry, with all contents exactly as she'd packed them. "Why would mine be different?" she asked, her voice small and frightened. Neither Jess nor I had an answer. That third day, we made a pact. We would pick a direction and walk in a straight line, no matter what we encountered. If we came to a ravine, we'd climb down one side and up the other. If we hit a stream, we'd follow it until it led us out of the forest. We would not be trapped in this place for another night. We started walking north, using Jess's compass since the GPS was still useless. The forest around us seemed to shift and change as we moved through it, trees rearranging themselves when we weren't looking directly at them. But we pressed on, marking our path by breaking branches and scratching arrows into tree bark. For most of the day, we seemed to be making progress. The terrain was gradually changing, becoming less dense and overgrown. We began to hope that we were finally escaping whatever trap we'd stumbled into. Then, around 4 o'clock, Emma disappeared. It happened in an instant. We were walking single file along what might have been an old deer trail, with Emma in the lead, Jess in the middle, and me bringing up the rear. Emma was maybe 10 feet ahead of us when she stepped around a large oak tree. She never appeared on the other side. Jess and I ran to the tree calling Emma's name, but she was simply gone. The trail continued on the far side of the oak, empty and undisturbed. We searched the area frantically, calling and crashing through the underbrush. But there was no sign of her. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. It was as if she had been erased from existence. We spent hours searching, expanding our circle wider and wider. We shouted until our voices were hoarse. We investigated every tree, every boulder, every depression in the ground that might have hidden her. But Emma was gone. As darkness began to fall, Jess and I faced a horrible choice. We could continue searching in the dark, probably getting more lost than we already were, or we could make camp and resume looking in the morning. We chose to camp, setting up our 2 remaining tents close together in a small clearing near the oak tree where Emma had vanished. Neither of us spoke much as we prepared for what we both knew would be a terrible night. The sounds started as soon as full darkness fell. But this time, mixed in with the crying and whispering, we heard Emma's voice. "Sarah, Jess, where are you? I'm lost. Please help me." Her voice seemed to come from every direction at once, echoing strangely among the trees. Sometimes she sounded close, just beyond the edge of our light. Sometimes she sounded far away, barely audible over the other forest sounds. "We have to help her," I said, starting to unzip my tent. "No." Jess grabbed my arm. "Don't you think it's strange that she sounds exactly the same every time? The same words? The same tone?" I listened more carefully. She was right. Emma's cries for help were repeating in a loop, like a recording playing over and over. The same inflection, the same pauses, the same emphasis on certain words. "That's not her," Jess said quietly. "Whatever that is, it's not Emma." We huddled in our tents as the false Emma called to us all night, sometimes sounding desperate, sometimes angry, sometimes so heartbroken that it took all my willpower not to run out into the darkness to help her. When morning came, we found footprints circling our campsite, small, bare feet that had pressed deep into the soft earth. But the prints were wrong. The toes too long, the heel too narrow, the arch non-existent. They looked almost human, but not quite. And leading away from our camp, heading deeper into the forest, was a clear trail of Emma's boot prints. Against every instinct that told us to stay together, we followed the trail. The boot prints led us through the strangest part of the forest yet. Here, the trees grew in perfect geometric patterns, their branches intertwining overhead to form natural archways and corridors. The ground was carpeted with moss that felt spongy and unnatural under our feet, and everywhere, carved into tree trunks and scratched into rocks, were symbols that hurt to look at directly. The trail led us deeper and deeper into this geometrical forest, past clearings where the grass grew in perfect spirals and streams that flowed upward against gravity. Our watches had stopped working entirely, their faces showing random times that changed every time we looked at them. We'd been following the trail for what felt like hours when we found Emma. She was sitting on a fallen log in a circular clearing, her back to us, perfectly still. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on when she disappeared, and her red backpack was sitting neatly beside her. "Emma," I called, relief flooding through me. "Thank God, we've been looking for you everywhere." But she didn't turn around, didn't move at all. "Emma?" Jess approached more cautiously. "Are you okay?" Still no movement. We walked around the log to face her, and what we saw made my blood freeze. Emma was smiling. Not a normal smile, but something too wide, too perfect, showing far too many teeth. Her eyes were open but completely black, reflecting nothing. And when she spoke, Her voice was flat and emotionless. "Hello, Sarah. Hello, Jessica. I've been waiting for you." "Emma, what happened to you?" I asked, though every instinct was screaming at me to run. "I went for a walk," she said in that same flat tone. "I met some new friends. They showed me how to be better, how to be perfect." She stood up in one fluid motion, and I could see that something was terribly wrong with the way she moved. Her joints bent in ways they shouldn't, and her arms hung just a little too long for her body. "They want to meet you too," Emma continued. "They want to show you how to be better, how to be like me." "We need to go," Jess whispered. "Now." But as we turned to leave, we found our way blocked. The trees around the clearing had moved closer, their branches forming a living wall, and standing among them, barely visible in the shadows, were shapes that might have been human once but were wrong in ways that my mind refused to process. Emma laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "You can't leave now. They've been so excited to meet you, especially you, Sarah. They have such wonderful plans for you." That's when I understood. Whatever had taken Emma, whatever was wearing her face and speaking with her voice, it had been using her to lead us here. We had been herded like cattle to this place, this clearing where the trees formed a prison and things that weren't quite human waited in the shadows. The false Emma reached out toward me with fingers that were too long and jointed in too many places. "Don't be afraid, Sarah. It only hurts for a moment. Then you'll be perfect too. We'll all be perfect together." I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The tree wall had closed completely around us, and the shadowy figures were emerging from between the trunks. They moved wrong, flowing rather than walking, their limbs extending and contracting like they were made of liquid rather than flesh and bone. Jess grabbed a thick branch from the ground and swung it at the nearest figure. The branch passed right through it, meeting no resistance. But the thing reacted, emitting a sound like steam escaping from a radiator, and suddenly Jess was screaming. Her face was changing, the features shifting and flowing like melted wax. Her eyes rolled back to show only white, and when she opened her mouth, black fluid poured out. "It's wonderful," she said in a voice that was no longer her own. "Join us, Sarah. Join us, and be perfect." I ran. I don't know how I escaped that clearing. The tree wall should have been impossible to penetrate, but somehow I found myself crashing through the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots catching my feet. Behind me, I could hear them following, Emma and Jess and the others, their voices calling my name in perfect harmony. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, finally collapsing in a tangle of fallen logs beside a small stream. The water was flowing downhill, following normal gravity, and when I looked up, I could see actual sky through the canopy. Real sky, with real clouds and the real sun. I had escaped the wrong forest. It took me another day to find my way back to the main trail, and from there to the parking area where Emma's Honda sat exactly where she'd left it. I called 911 from the car, telling them my friends were missing in Wayne National Forest. The search teams found nothing. They covered the area where I said we'd gotten lost, but they found no unmarked trail, no twisted trees, no circular clearing. According to their maps and GPS units, we had never left the main trail. There was no record of us deviating from the marked path at all. They found Emma's body 3 days later, in a ravine about 2 miles from where I said she'd disappeared. The coroner ruled it accidental death, a fall that broke her neck. But I saw the pictures, and I know what I saw. Her face was frozen in that perfect too-wide smile, and her fingers were too long. They never found Jess. The official report states that Jessica Davis left the group voluntarily and is believed to have hiked out of the forest on her own. Her car was found in a shopping center parking lot in Columbus, abandoned but undamaged. Security cameras showed someone who looked like Jess walking away from the vehicle, but the footage was too grainy to be certain. I know it wasn't her, not really. I've been getting letters from Jess since I returned home. They come with no return address, and the postmarks are from towns that don't exist. The handwriting is perfect. Too perfect, like it was done by a machine rather than a human hand. The letters all say the same thing. "Come back, Sarah. We're waiting for you. We want to show you how to be perfect." I've moved 3 times since the hiking trip, but the letters keep finding me. They know where I am. They're watching and waiting, and someday I know they'll come for me, because I left something behind in that forest. Something important. The last letter came yesterday, and this time it was different. Instead of the usual message, it contained a single photograph. It shows me sleeping in my new apartment, taken from inside my bedroom. In the corner of the photo, barely visible in the shadows by my closet, is a familiar figure. Tall and thin, with joints that bend the wrong way and fingers that are too long. Emma's smile hasn't changed at all. They're coming for me tonight. I can feel them gathering in the darkness outside my window, patient and perfect and wrong. The false friends I left behind in a forest that doesn't exist on any map. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what really happened. I need someone to understand that if I disappear, if they find my body, or if I simply vanish like Jess did, it won't be an accident. It won't be a hiking mishap or a voluntary disappearance. It will be because I wasn't perfect enough to resist them. The sun is setting now, and I can hear them whispering my name outside. They sound just like Emma and Jess, my best friends who died in a forest that shouldn't exist. They want me to open the door. They want me to join them. They want me to be perfect too. I won't go with them. I can't. But I don't think I have a choice anymore. They've been patient, but their patience is ending. Tonight, they'll take me back to their forest where time moves wrong and trees rearrange themselves, and crying children lead the lost deeper into darkness. If you're reading this, stay out of Wayne National Forest. Don't trust unmarked trails or GPS units that show blank spaces. Don't follow the sounds of crying children, no matter how real they seem. And if you meet people who claim to be Emma Collins or Jessica Davis, or someone who looks exactly like me but smiles too wide and bends in ways humans shouldn't, run. Run, and don't look back, because they'll be perfect in every way except the ones that matter. And they'll want nothing more than to make you perfect too. The whispering is getting louder now. They're right outside my door. I can see Emma's smile through the keyhole. It's time to go home. My name is James Anderson, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the Hocking Hills of southeastern Ohio 3 weeks ago, though it feels like a lifetime has passed since then. I'm writing this from a hospital bed, my hands still shaking as I try to make sense of what we encountered in those ancient woods. The doctors say I'm suffering from severe trauma and exposure, but they don't understand. They can't understand what Sarah became. We had planned this camping trip for months. Michael Williams, Sarah Rodriguez, and myself. Old college friends trying to recapture something we'd lost in the grind of adult life. Sarah had found the spot online, a remote section of the Hocking Hills near Old Man's Cave, where unofficial trails wound deeper into the forest than most tourists ever ventured. She'd been obsessed with it, sending us articles about the area's history, the Native American legends of spirits that dwelt in the sandstone caves. "It'll be perfect," she had said over beers the week before. "No cell service, no distractions. Just us and the wilderness." Michael had laughed, running his fingers through his prematurely gray hair. "Sounds like the setup to every horror movie ever made." Sarah's green eyes had flashed with something I couldn't quite identify then. "Don't be such a coward, Mike. What's the worst that could happen?" Now I know. Now I know exactly what the worst that could happen looks like. We arrived at the trailhead on Friday afternoon, October 13th, a detail that seems almost laughably cliché now. The parking area was empty except for an old pickup truck with Ohio plates, its bed filled with what looked like hunting gear. Sarah parked her Jeep beside it, and we shouldered our packs, following her confident stride toward the tree line. The official trail was well marked for the first 2 miles, winding past the famous caves and waterfalls that drew thousands of visitors each year. But Sarah had other plans. She'd studied topographical maps, marked GPS coordinates, and assured us she knew exactly where she was going. "There's supposed to be an old ranger station about 5 miles in," she said, consulting her phone's GPS as we walked. "Been abandoned for decades. We can set up camp near there." The forest was beautiful in that dying autumn way. Leaves the color of rust and flame scattered across the sandstone ridges. The air crisp with the promise of winter. I felt my city stress beginning to dissolve as we hiked deeper into the woods, following Sarah's lead as she navigated by compass and instinct. That was when we noticed the first strange thing. "That's weird," Sarah muttered, stopping abruptly and staring at her phone. "GPS just cut out." Michael peered over her shoulder. "We're probably just in a dead zone. These hills mess with signals." But I saw Sarah's face, the way her brow furrowed as she tapped the screen. "No, it was working fine a second ago. Look." She held up the phone and I could see the map display, but our location marker was gone. Worse, the trails we'd been following were no longer visible on the screen, as if the software had simply forgotten they existed. "Must be a glitch," I said, though something cold was already settling in my stomach. "We can navigate the old-fashioned way." Sarah nodded, but I caught the uncertainty in her eyes before she tucked the phone away. We continued hiking, following what appeared to be an old deer trail winding between massive sandstone formations. The afternoon light was already beginning to fade, filtered through the dense canopy above us. An hour later, we reached a clearing that seemed perfect for camping, a rough circle of flat ground surrounded by towering trees, with a small creek running along one edge. But there was no sign of any ranger station, abandoned or otherwise. "This doesn't look right," Michael said, dropping his pack with a grunt. "According to the map, we should have hit that station by now." Sarah was already unpacking, her movements quick and efficient. "Plans change, Mike. This spot is perfect. We've got water, level ground, good tree cover." She was right, but something about the clearing felt wrong to me. The trees formed too perfect a circle, and the silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The creek burbled softly, but even that sound seemed muffled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. We set up our tents in a triangle around where we planned to build the fire pit. I was struggling with my tent stakes. The ground was harder than it looked, when Michael called out. "Guys, come look at this." He was standing near the edge of the clearing, pointing at something carved into the bark of a massive oak tree. As we approached, I could see it was some kind of symbol, a rough circle with jagged lines radiating outward like a child's drawing of the sun. But the carving was old, the bark grown over and around it in places. "Probably just campers," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Look at how weathered it is," Michael replied. "This has been here for years. Maybe decades." I reached out to trace the symbol with my finger and immediately jerked my hand back. The bark was warm to the touch, far warmer than the cool October air should have allowed. "Did you guys feel that?" They looked at me strangely. Michael touched the tree himself, then shook his head. "Feels normal to me." But Sarah's eyes were fixed on the symbol, and I saw her lips moving silently, as if she were reading something written in a language I couldn't understand. We finished setting up camp as the sun began to set, painting the clearing in shades of orange and red. I tried to shake off my unease as we gathered deadwood for the fire. It was just a camping trip, just 3 friends trying to reconnect with nature. Nothing more. But when I struck the match to light the kindling, the flame sputtered and died immediately. I tried again and again, but every match went out the moment it touched the wood, as if some invisible force was snuffing them out. "Let me try," Sarah said, taking the matches from my hands. But she had the same result. Each match would light normally until it approached the kindling, then die instantly. Michael was examining the wood. "It's dry enough. This doesn't make sense." Sarah stood up abruptly, her face set with determination. "I'll find better wood." She stalked off toward the tree line, leaving Michael and me staring at the stubborn pile of kindling. In the growing darkness, I could hear her moving through the underbrush, branches snapping under her feet. But the sounds seemed to come from all directions at once, as if the forest was echoing and distorting them. "Sarah," Michael called out. "Don't go too far." No response. The snapping sounds continued for another minute, then stopped abruptly, leaving us in absolute silence. "Sarah!" I shouted, louder this time. Nothing. Michael and I exchanged glances, and I saw my own fear reflected in his eyes. We grabbed our flashlights and headed in the direction she'd gone, calling her name and sweeping our beams through the trees. We found her 20 minutes later, standing perfectly still beside the creek about 100 yards from camp. She was facing away from us, her body rigid, arms hanging loose at her sides. "Sarah?" Michael approached her cautiously. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear us. I moved around to face her, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice water. Her eyes were open, but rolled back so only the whites showed. Her mouth was moving in a silent rhythm, lips forming words I couldn't make out. But worst of all was her smile, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched her features into something alien and wrong. "Sarah." I shook her shoulders, hard. She blinked once and her eyes rolled forward, focusing on my face with apparent confusion. The smile vanished as if it had never been there. "What?" she said. "Why are you guys shouting?" "You've been standing here for 20 minutes, Michael said. "We were calling your name." Sarah looked genuinely bewildered. 20 minutes? I just came to get water." She held up her empty water bottle. I must have zoned out for a second. But I had seen that smile, that vacant stare. And I noticed she was standing in the creek, her boots soaked through, though she didn't seem to realize it. We walked back to camp in uneasy silence. Sarah seemed normal enough, chatting about the beauty of the forest, but I kept stealing glances at her profile in the flashlight beam. There was something different about the way she moved, a subtle change in her gait that I couldn't quite identify. Back at the campsite, Michael tried the fire again. This time, the matches worked perfectly, and soon we had a cheerful blaze crackling in the center of our triangle of tents. We ate dinner from our camp stoves, sharing stories and trying to recapture the easy camaraderie we'd come here for. But as the night deepened, the atmosphere grew stranger. It started with the sounds, soft whispers that seemed to come from just beyond the firelight, too faint to make out words but constant enough to be unnerving. When I mentioned them, both Sarah and Michael claimed they couldn't hear anything. Then there were the shadows. As the fire flickered, I kept catching glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, shapes that disappeared the moment I turned to look directly at them. Once, I could have sworn I saw a pale figure standing between two trees, watching us with eyes that reflected the firelight like an animal's. But when I pointed it out, there was nothing there. "You're just spooked," Sarah said, but her voice carried an odd undertone, almost like amusement. "It's easy to see things that aren't there in the dark." Michael was studying the fire with a troubled expression. "The flames keep changing color," he said quietly. "Blue, then green, then back to normal." I looked but saw only ordinary orange flames. "I don't see it. They were blue just a second ago. Bright blue, like a gas burner." Sarah laughed, a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was her laugh, but wrong, somehow. Too high, too sharp. "You boys are really working yourselves up. Maybe we should call it a night." We banked the fire and retreated to our tents, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the sounds of the forest, or what should have been the sounds of the forest. Instead of the usual symphony of night creatures, there was only an oppressive silence broken occasionally by soft scratching noises that seemed to circle our campsite. Around midnight, I heard Sarah's tent zipper opening. Through the thin nylon of my own tent, I could see her silhouette moving in the dim moonlight. She walked to the edge of the clearing and stood there, motionless, for what felt like hours. I must have dozed, because the next thing I knew, dawn light was filtering through the trees and Sarah was shaking my tent. "Rise and shine, sleepyhead," she called out, her voice bright and cheerful. "Beautiful morning for a hike." I emerged from my tent feeling groggy and disoriented. Michael was already up, sitting by the cold fire pit with a cup of coffee and a troubled expression. "Did you see her last night?" he asked quietly when Sarah was out of earshot, rummaging through her pack. "Yeah, standing at the edge of the clearing. She was there for hours, James. Just standing. I don't think she moved once." Sarah rejoined us, her face glowing with an enthusiasm that seemed forced. "I found the most amazing trail this morning. It leads up to these caves that aren't on any of the maps. We have to check them out." "When did you find a trail?" I asked. "It's barely past sunrise." "I'm an early riser," she said with that too bright smile. "Come on, pack up. You're going to love this." Michael and I exchanged glances but followed her lead. We broke camp quickly, though I noticed that my supplies seemed different somehow. My food packages looked older, some of them green with mold that hadn't been there the day before. My sleeping bag, which I'd left zipped up, was open all the way down one side, the zipper teeth splayed apart as if something had forced its way out from inside. Sarah led us along a narrow trail that definitely hadn't been there the day before. It wound upward through the forest, following the contours of the sandstone ridges. As we climbed, the trees grew thicker, blocking out more and more of the sky until we were walking in perpetual twilight. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Michael asked after we'd been hiking for over an hour. "Trust me," Sarah replied without turning around. "It's just a little farther." But something was wrong with her voice. It sounded flat, emotionless, like she was reading from a script. And there was something off about her posture, too. She was walking too straight, too rigid, as if someone else was controlling her movements. The trail led to a series of caves carved into the hillside, their openings like dark mouths in the stone. Sarah stopped at the largest entrance, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Isn't it beautiful?" she said, and when she turned to face us, I saw that smile again, too wide, stretching her features into something inhuman. The cave mouth was roughly circular, about 8 feet in diameter, with smooth walls that disappeared into absolute darkness. A cold wind emerged from the depths, carrying a smell like rotting meat and wet earth. "I don't think we should go in there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't be silly," Sarah said, and stepped into the cave without hesitation. Michael grabbed my arm. "Something's really wrong with her, James. That's not Sarah." I knew he was right, but what were we supposed to do? Leave our friend alone in a cave system that could stretch for miles underground? We followed her into the darkness, our flashlight beams seeming feeble against the oppressive black. The cave was larger than it appeared from outside, with a high ceiling that our lights couldn't reach. The walls were covered in the same symbols we'd seen carved into the tree, but these were fresh, as if they'd been carved recently. And they seemed to move in our peripheral vision, shifting and changing when we weren't looking directly at them. Sarah was walking ahead of us with confident steps, as if she knew exactly where she was going. But she wasn't using a flashlight, somehow navigating the uneven floor in complete darkness. "Sarah, wait up," Michael called, but she didn't slow down. The cave branched in several directions, and Sarah took the leftmost passage without hesitation. We followed, our footsteps echoing strangely in the confined space. The walls seemed to be closing in, and I had to fight down a surge of claustrophobia. That's when we lost her. One moment, Sarah was 10 feet ahead of us, her figure visible in our flashlight beams. The next, she was gone, as if the darkness had simply swallowed her whole. "Sarah!" I shouted, and my voice echoed back from a dozen different directions. We searched the cave system for hours, calling her name until our voices were hoarse. The passages seemed to twist back on themselves, leading us in circles despite our best efforts to map our route. Several times, I could have sworn I heard her voice calling back to us, but it always seemed to come from the wrong direction, leading us deeper into the labyrinth. Finally, exhausted and increasingly panicked, we made our way back to the surface. The sun was setting again. Somehow an entire day had passed in what felt like a few hours. "We have to get help," Michael said, his face pale in the dying light. "Call search and rescue." But when I checked my phone, the screen showed a date that made no sense. According to the display, it was October 16th, 3 days after we'd entered the forest. We'd lost not just Sarah, but an entire day and night. "That can't be right," Michael muttered, staring at his own phone. "We only went into the cave this morning." But the evidence was undeniable. We'd somehow lost track of time, just as we'd lost track of Sarah. We made our way back to the clearing where we'd camped, hoping Sarah might have found her way back there, but when we arrived we found our tents exactly as we'd left them, covered in 3 days' worth of fallen leaves. "This is impossible," Michael said. "We broke camp this morning. We packed everything up." Yet there were our tents, our gear, our cold fire pit, as if we'd never left at all. We built a new fire as darkness fell, trying to make sense of what was happening to us. The flames burned normally this time, casting dancing shadows on the trees around us. We ate in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. That's when we heard her voice. "Help me," came a faint cry from the direction of the creek. "Please, help me." We grabbed our flashlights and ran toward the sound, calling Sarah's name. We found her collapsed beside the water, her clothes torn and dirty, her face streaked with mud and tears. "Oh, God, Sarah!" Michael dropped to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt? Where have you been?" She looked up at us with wide, frightened eyes. "I got lost in the caves. I've been wandering for days, trying to find my way out. There was something down there, something watching me." We helped her back to the campsite, giving her water and food, wrapping her in a blanket. She seemed weak and disoriented, but otherwise unharmed. I kept studying her face in the firelight, looking for some sign that this wasn't really Sarah, but she seemed normal, frightened and exhausted, but normal. "What did you see in the caves?" I asked gently. Sarah shuddered, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I'm not sure. It was so dark and I was scared, but I kept hearing voices, whispers, and there were drawings on the walls. Old drawings, like the one we saw on the tree." "We found that tree," Michael said, "and we followed you into the caves, but you just vanished." "I don't remember that," Sarah said, confusion clouding her features. "I remember going to get water from the creek, and then I was in the cave. Everything in between is just gone." We talked for another hour, trying to piece together what had happened. Sarah's memory was fragmentary, full of gaps and inconsistencies. She remembered being cold and lost, but couldn't explain how she'd gotten separated from us or why she'd entered the cave system in the first place. Eventually, exhaustion overtook us all. We helped Sarah into her tent, and I made sure she had everything she needed before retreating to my own sleeping bag. But sleep was elusive. I lay awake listening to the sounds of the forest, which had returned to normal. Insects chirping, small animals rustling in the underbrush, the distant call of an owl. It was as if Sarah's return had broken whatever spell had been cast over the clearing. Around 3 a.m., I heard her tent zipper opening again. Through the thin wall of my tent I could see her silhouette moving in the moonlight, just as she had the night before. But this time, instead of standing at the edge of the clearing, she walked directly to the fire pit. I watched in horrified fascination as she knelt beside the cold ashes and began to dig with her bare hands. Her movements were methodical, mechanical, like she was following precise instructions. She dug until she'd created a hole about 2 feet deep, then reached into it and pulled something out. In the pale moonlight, I couldn't see what it was clearly, but it looked organic, soft and dark, about the size of a human heart. Sarah brought it to her mouth and bit into it, tearing off pieces with her teeth and swallowing them with obvious relish. I must have made some sound of revulsion because she suddenly looked up, her eyes reflecting the moonlight like an animal's. For a moment she stared directly at my tent, and I was certain she could see me watching her. Then she smiled that terrible, too wide smile and went back to feeding. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag until dawn, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. When morning came, Sarah was in her tent, apparently asleep. The fire pit looked normal, with no sign of any digging. "We need to leave," I told Michael as quietly as possible while Sarah was still in her tent. "Right now." Michael looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes. "Did you see something last night?" I told him about what I'd witnessed and watched his face grow pale. "That's not Sarah," he whispered. "Whatever came back from those caves, it's not her." We were discussing our options when Sarah emerged from her tent, looking refreshed and cheerful. "Good morning," she called out brightly. "Ready for another day of adventure?" But I noticed things I'd missed the night before. Her skin had an unhealthy pallor, almost gray in the morning light. Her movements were too fluid, too graceful, as if she was floating rather than walking. And her eyes, there was something wrong with her eyes. They were the right color, the right shape, but they were completely empty, like looking into the windows of an abandoned house. "I think we should head back today," Michael said carefully. "We've been out here long enough." Sarah's smile faltered for just a moment. "But we're having such a good time. And I found something wonderful yesterday that I want to show you." "What did you find?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "It's a surprise," she said, her smile returning. "Trust me. You'll love it." She began breaking down her tent with practiced efficiency, and Michael and I had no choice but to follow suit. But instead of leading us back toward the parking area, Sarah headed deeper into the forest, following another trail that definitely hadn't been there before. "This isn't the way out," Michael protested. "It's a shortcut," Sarah replied without turning around. "I know these woods better than you think." The trail wound upward through increasingly dense forest. The trees seemed to lean in over us, blocking out the sky and creating an oppressive twilight atmosphere. I noticed that the symbols carved into tree trunks were becoming more frequent and more elaborate. Some of them looked fresh, as if they'd been carved that very morning. After hiking for several hours, we reached another clearing, this one much smaller than where we'd camped. In the center stood a structure that made my blood run cold, a rough altar made from stacked stones, stained dark with what looked like dried blood. Around it, arranged in a perfect circle, were human skulls bleached white by time and weather. "Isn't it beautiful?" Sarah said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "The local tribe used to make sacrifices here. They believed it was a gateway to the spirit world." Michael backed away from the altar, his face white with terror. "We need to leave. Now." But Sarah was already moving toward the center of the circle, her steps deliberate and purposeful. "Don't you want to see what it does? Don't you want to meet them?" "Meet who?" I demanded. Sarah turned to face us, and I saw that her eyes had changed. They were completely black now, like pools of tar. Her smile was wider than ever, stretching from ear to ear in a way that should have been anatomically impossible. "The ones who live in the hollow places," she said, and her voice was no longer her own. It was deeper, multiplied, as if several people were speaking in unison. "The ones who have been waiting for so long." The air around the altar began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The skulls started to move, their empty sockets turning to focus on Michael and me. And from somewhere underground, I could hear something large moving, scraping against stone. Michael grabbed my arm. "Run!" We turned and fled back down the trail, crashing through the underbrush in our panic. Behind us, I could hear Sarah, or the thing that had been Sarah, laughing. It was a sound like breaking glass, like screaming children, like the last breath of dying animals. The forest seemed to shift around us as we ran, trails appearing and disappearing, landmarks moving when we weren't looking directly at them. It was as if the entire woodland was alive and hostile, trying to trap us in its depths. I don't know how long we ran, but eventually we burst out of the tree line and found ourselves back at the parking area. Sarah's Jeep was still there, covered with 3 days' worth of fallen leaves, just as we'd left it. But we'd lost the keys. They'd been in Sarah's pack, and Sarah was still back there in the forest, along with whatever had taken her place. Michael found a rock and smashed the driver's side window. "We'll hotwire it," he said, his hands shaking as he reached under the dashboard. That's when we heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming down the trail behind us. Michael worked frantically with the wires while I watched the tree line, praying we'd have time to escape. Sarah emerged from the forest, but she was wrong in every possible way. Her limbs were too long, her joints bending at impossible angles. Her skin had taken on a mottled, bark-like texture, and her hair hung in greasy tendrils around a face that was no longer quite human. The thing that had been her eyes were gone entirely, replaced by dark hollows that seemed to extend infinitely inward. "Where are you going?" she asked in that multiplied voice. "The ceremony isn't finished." The engine turned over with a roar, and Michael threw the Jeep into gear. We tore out of the parking area, gravel spraying behind us as the Sarah thing watched us go with that terrible, empty smile. We drove for hours in silence, neither of us speaking until we reached the safety of the nearest town. When we finally stopped at a gas station, Michael turned to me with haunted eyes. "What do we tell people? Who's going to believe this?" I didn't have an answer. How do you explain that your friend was taken by something ancient and malevolent? Something that wore her face but was utterly alien inside? How do you describe the horror of watching someone you care about become a puppet for forces beyond human understanding? We called the police from the gas station, reported Sarah missing in the state forest. A search and rescue team was organized, and we led them back to the area where we'd been camping. But when we reached the coordinates, there was no clearing, no creek, no sign that anyone had ever been there. The caves we'd explored were gone as if they'd never existed. The official report states that Sarah Rodriguez disappeared while hiking in Hocking Hills State Forest. Her body was never found. Michael and I were treated for exposure and dehydration, then released after giving our statements. But I know the truth. Sarah is still out there, in those hollow places between the world we know and the ancient darkness that waits beneath. She's still smiling that impossible smile, still serving whatever entity claimed her in those caves. And sometimes, late at night, I get phone calls with no caller ID. When I answer, there's just breathing on the other end, and occasionally a whisper that might be my name. The voice sounds like Sarah's, but wrong. Empty and hungry and utterly inhuman. I've moved 3 times since then, changed my phone number, even my name. But the calls keep coming, because whatever took Sarah knows that Michael and I escaped, and it's not finished with us yet. I can feel it watching me, waiting for the right moment to complete what it started in those woods. And I know that sooner or later I'll have to go back. The thing that wears Sarah's face won't rest until it has us all. Until then, I'm writing this account, hoping someone will believe it, hoping someone will understand the truth about what lurks in the hollow places of the world. Because if you ever find yourself in a forest where the GPS stops working, where the campfire won't light, where your friend comes back from the darkness changed, run. Run, and don't look back. Because some things that go missing should stay lost. And some people who return aren't people anymore. The calls are getting more frequent now. Last night the voice was clearer, more familiar. It said my name 3 times, then whispered, "The hollow calls, James. Come home." I think I'm running out of time.